After the reading of my grandmother's will, I came home bursting with excitement, ready to tell my husband that she had left me $18 million and a breathtaking estate in Aspen. Instead, I found my husband and mother-in-law waiting for me on the porch, holding divorce papers. "The house has been sold, and you are homeless," my husband sneered. I just smiled. "What is so funny?" he barked. "Actually," I replied, pulling a document from my bag, "the house you just sold belongs to the IRS. My name is Diana. I am 33 years old, and I am a forensic accountant. Before we go any further, let me know in the comments where you are watching this from, and if you have ever had to stand up to toxic in-laws who completely undervalued you, hit that like button and subscribe." The yellow cab pulled away from the curb, leaving me at the end of the long driveway of the suburban Connecticut home I shared with my husband, Bradley. Fresh off a flight from Chicago, I was bone-tired from burying my beloved grandmother. I was physically running on empty, but my mind was racing with a life-changing revelation. My grandmother was a sharp, perceptive woman who had always seen right through Bradley's flashy exterior and empty promises. During the reading of the will, her attorney revealed that she had left me an $18 million irrevocable trust, alongside her flawless mountain estate in Aspen. Gripping the handle of my suitcase, I walked up the driveway, eager to share the news that our financial struggles were over forever. I expected to find Bradley inside, perhaps making dinner, or at least ready to offer a comforting hug after a grueling week of funeral arrangements. Instead, I found him standing on the front porch with his arms crossed. Next to him was his mother, Barbara, wearing her signature pearl necklace and a smug grin that instantly made my teeth grind. The air on the porch felt heavy and cold. Before I could even set my suitcase down, Bradley stepped forward aggressively and slammed a thick stack of legal documents against my chest. The heavy papers slipped from my hands, scattering across the floor. "What is this?" I asked, staring at the bold words reading, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." "It is exactly what it looks like," Bradley said, his voice dripping with condescension and triumph. "I am done, and before you try to claim half of this property in court, you should know I have already handled it. This morning, I sold the house, using the general power of attorney you signed last year. The buyer wired cash directly, and it is now sitting safely in my offshore crypto account. You have 10 minutes to pack whatever fits in that suitcase and get off my property. You are homeless." I stood there as the cool evening breeze swept over me, letting the sheer audacity of his words sink into my exhausted brain. Before I could form a response, Barbara stepped forward, looking me up and down with pure disgust. "Let us be completely honest, Diana. You never belonged in this family," Barbara sneered, adjusting her expensive cashmere shawl. "Look at you, in your cheap department store blazer and scuffed shoes. Did you honestly think a woman who spends her days tapping on spreadsheets like a glorified calculator could keep a man like my son happy? Bradley is a visionary. His crypto investments are changing the financial world, while you sit in your home office doing tedious forensic accounting for pennies. He is about to be a father to a real family, and my grandson needs a home that reflects wealth and status, not a house weighed down by a woman who refuses to elevate herself." "You have always been a liability," Bradley chimed in, pointing an accusing finger in my face. "I had to take over managing our assets because you are just too foolish when it comes to money. Left to you, we would be living like peasants while you track down missing digits for your clients. I deserve a life of luxury, and I finally found a brilliant woman who understands me and knows how to treat a real man." The words hung in the air like a physical blow. He was going to be a father. He had betrayed me. The truth should have shattered me. Any normal wife would have collapsed onto the welcome mat, crying and begging for an explanation, pleading to save her marriage. But as I looked at the two of them standing side by side, I felt nothing but a profound, icy clarity. I remembered the countless times Barbara had humiliated me at family dinners, handing me exorbitant restaurant bills and claiming my simple lifestyle meant I needed to pay for the privilege of dining with them. I remembered the Thanksgiving she deliberately spilled red wine down my only nice dress, loudly proclaiming it was an improvement to the design. I remembered Bradley belittling my career, calling me a paranoid bean counter whenever I questioned his shady financial moves, or asked to see actual returns on his supposedly brilliant crypto portfolio. They truly believed I was nothing but an uneducated peasant who was lucky to breathe the same air as them. I looked at Bradley, seeing him clearly for the first time in my life. His posture was arrogant, his chin held high as he waited for my tears. He wanted to see me break. He needed to crush me completely and throw me into the street like garbage to feed his own ego. He wanted to feel like a god in front of his adoring mother. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't drop to my knees and beg for my home or my marriage. Instead, a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I looked down at the divorce papers fluttering in the wind, then back up at Bradley's arrogant face. My smile turned into a soft, low laugh. Bradley's smug grin faltered. He glanced at his mother, then back at me. "What on earth is so funny?" he demanded, stepping forward heavily. "You just lost your husband and your house. Have you lost your mind?" I reached into my leather tote bag, my fingers brushing past the thick envelope containing my new $18 million trust documents. But that wasn't what I pulled out. I withdrew a single sheet of paper with a very prominent federal seal stamped at the top. "I haven't lost my mind, Bradley," I said calmly, unfolding the document with a deliberate slowness. "I am just marveling at the sheer magnitude of your stupidity. You see, this morning I used my tedious forensic accounting skills to look into the buyer of this house. You thought you were incredibly clever, selling the property through a shell company to an anonymous cash buyer, forging my signature, and hiding the funds in your crypto wallet." I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. I slapped the paper flat against his chest, right over his racing heart. "Actually," I continued, keeping my voice perfectly level and light, "the house you just sold belongs to the IRS. Bradley flinched back, as if the paper was scalding hot. He looked down at the federal seal, his eyes scanning the bold black text, but his arrogant sneer quickly returned. He crumpled the document into a ball and threw it onto the porch floor, right next to the scattered divorce papers. He reached into the pocket of his tailored blazer and pulled out a thick, glossy folder, waving it inches from my face. "Are you insane, Diana?" he spat, his voice rising in pitch. "I have the legally binding sales contract right here, signed, notarized, and filed with the county clerk this morning. The funds were wired directly to me. You think you can scare me with a fake piece of paper you printed off the internet? You have always lived in a total fantasy world about how real wealth works." Barbara let out a sharp laugh from the doorway, crossing her arms as her diamond bracelets clinked together. "I told you she lived in a delusion, Bradley. She tracks down missing invoices for failing businesses all day and thinks she understands high finance. Tell this foolish girl to pack her cheap bags and call a cab, or I will call the police to remove her for trespassing." Bradley's long fingers tapped the signature page of his contract. "Look right here, Diana. That is your signature. I used the power of attorney you gave me last year. I had to. You forced my hand because you are completely financially illiterate." He stepped closer, the smell of his cologne suffocating in the night air. "Remember when we first got married and you wanted to pool your salary into a joint savings account? What a joke. I had to give you an allowance every month just to keep us afloat. I took over the finances because while the crypto market was exploding, you would have wasted your income on groceries and utility bills. I turned your pathetic salary into a massive portfolio. I had to sign your name today because if I had asked, you would have panicked like a typical clueless housewife. I am the provider here. I manage the assets while you just consume them." His gaslighting was an old familiar song. For years he had made me believe I was financially incompetent. He took my paychecks, deposited them into accounts I couldn't access, and handed me a prepaid debit card with a strict weekly limit. He told me it was for our future, for the massive empire he was building. He told me I was too emotional to handle the pressure of real investing. I had spent countless nights crying in the bathroom, wondering why I couldn't even understand our household budget, while at the very same time I was uncovering multi-million-dollar corporate fraud cases for my clients. But standing on the porch now, looking at the man who had stolen my money, my home, and my dignity, there were no tears. I felt only a cold, calculated sense of reason. "You forged my signature," I said, making sure to enunciate every single syllable. "You just admitted out loud, in front of a witness, that you forged my signature on a property transfer document." "I have a power of attorney," Bradley shouted, his face turning a deep crimson. "It is completely legal." "A general power of attorney does not give you the right to sign over my primary residence to an obscured LLC without my explicit written consent," I corrected him. my voice cutting through his bravado like a scalpel. But that isn't even the best part, Bradley. The best part is the specific LLC you sold this house to. I stepped past his aggressive frame, ignoring his attempts to intimidate me, and looked directly at Barbara. When my eyes met hers, her smug expression stiffened slightly. She shifted her weight, suddenly looking uncomfortable in her expensive heels. You see, I didn't just print a random piece of paper off the internet, I continued, my gaze locked onto my mother-in-law. Forensic accounting isn't just about missing invoices. It is about untangling webs of deception. It is about following the trail when people try desperately to hide money. People like you, Barbara. What nonsense are you talking about? Barbara snapped, her voice losing its aristocratic drawl. Bradley, get her out of here. She is talking nonsense. I'm talking about the offshore shell company you set up 3 years ago, I said, watching the colour drain completely from Barbara's face. The one you named after your childhood pet. You quietly moved the deed of this house into that shell company to avoid paying property taxes and to hide your assets from the charity board you have been embezzling from. You thought you were a mastermind, but you made a fatal mistake. The IRS caught on 6 months ago. They placed a massive federal tax lien on this property and completely froze the asset. Bradley spun around to face his mother, his confident posture collapsing instantly. Mom, what is she talking about? You told me the title was clear? You told me to sell it quickly so we could put the cash into the new crypto token before the market rebounded. Barbara stumbled back against the doorframe, her hand flying to her throat. I don't know what she is talking about, Bradley. She is lying. She is just a jealous, bitter woman trying to ruin our success. I turned back to Bradley, who was now staring at his contract with trembling hands. The buyer you sold the house to this morning wasn't some anonymous real estate investor, Bradley. That LLC was a front company set up by the IRS. You didn't sell our home. You willingly signed over a federally seized asset, admitted to wire fraud by moving the funds into an offshore account, and you forged my signature to do it, which is officially a federal felony. You handed the government every piece of evidence they need to put you away. Bradley opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at the contract in his hands, as if it had suddenly turned into a venomous snake. The arrogant crypto genius, the man who had belittled my intelligence for years, finally realized he had walked directly into a massive, inescapable trap. His eyes darted frantically between me, the crumpled federal document on the porch, and his mother, who was now hyperventilating against the siding of the house. He dropped the contract. It landed on the wooden deck with a dull thud.
He backed away, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. You set me up, he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at my face. You knew about the lien, you knew about the federal investigation, and you let me sell it.
I just watched you act on your own overwhelming greed, I replied, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. I didn't force you to forge my name. I didn't force you to try and make me homeless. You did all of this to yourself. Panic took over his features entirely. He patted his blazer pockets frantically, searching for his phone. His hands shook so violently that he nearly dropped it twice, before successfully unlocking the screen. He needed a lifeline. He needed his lawyer. But as he swiped across the screen, he froze. His eyes widened, and the panic mutated into something dark and desperate. He looked up at me, his chest heaving as a twisted smile spread across his face. He remembered what I had said just moments before he threw the divorce papers at me. He remembered the $18 million in Aspen.
You think you won? He sneered, his voice dropping into a dangerous guttural tone. You think you can trap me with some tax mistake and just walk away with millions?
He aggressively dialed a number, hit the speakerphone button, and held it out between us. The phone rang loudly in the quiet evening air.
You forgot one crucial detail, Diana, Bradley yelled, a manic grin returning to his face. Oh, fine. The house is ruined. The IRS can have it. But we are still legally married. I filed the divorce papers, but they are not finalized, which means half of that $18 million inheritance you just bragged about is considered marital property. Half of it is mine.
Bradley's words hung in the air, a desperate grab for power from a man who had just admitted to a federal felony. I looked at the phone held out in his hand, then back up at his greedy, sweating face.
I threw my head back and laughed.
It was a deep, genuine laugh that echoed across the manicured lawn. Bradley lowered the phone, his face clouding with confusion. "What are you laughing at?" he demanded, closing his fist and taking a step toward me. "I know the law, Diana. We are married. This is a community property state. You just acquired $18 million during our legal marriage. $9 million of that belongs to me. It is mine." Barbara immediately straightened her posture, her earlier panic vanishing at the prospect of millions of dollars. "He is absolutely right," she declared, pointing a manicured finger at my face. "You owe this family for dragging my son down all these years. $9 million is the bare minimum for the emotional damage you have caused him. We will have your assets frozen before the sun goes down." I shook my head slowly, marveling at their shared delusion. "The two of you really need to read a book that doesn't have the word crypto in the title," I said, my voice dripping with pity. "Let me give you a free lesson in American trust law. Listen closely, Bradley, because your lawyer is going to charge you $500 an hour to tell you the exact same thing very soon." Bradley crossed his arms, trying to look intimidating, but his right eye was twitching uncontrollably. "Go ahead," he scoffed. "Try to talk your way out of marital assets. I listen to financial podcasts every single day. You can't hide cash from a spouse. An inheritance is generally considered separate property," I explained, enunciating each word so it could penetrate his thick skull. "But my grandmother didn't just dump a pile of cash into a standard checking account for you to drain like you drained our joint savings. She set up an irrevocable trust. Do you know what irrevocable means, Bradley? It means that absolutely no one, especially a soon-to-be ex-husband who just handed me divorce papers on the front porch, can alter, amend, or touch that trust except for the designated beneficiary." Bradley's smug grin faltered, his arms dropping to his sides. "I will sue the estate," he spat, stepping forward. "I will take you to probate court. I will hire the most aggressive litigators in the state and tie that money up in lawsuits for a decade. You won't see a single dime until you agree to settle with me out of court." "You can't," I replied, taking a step forward and forcing him back against the porch railing, because my incredibly sharp protective grandmother included a spendthrift clause. It is a very specific legal provision designed for exactly this situation. It protects the beneficiary from creditors, and more importantly, from greedy, opportunistic spouses. The trust explicitly states that the assets cannot be assigned, attached, or frozen by any legal process. Your name cannot touch it. Your aggressive litigators cannot touch it. And your creditors, the ones currently hunting you down for your failed offshore investments, cannot touch it either. The Aspen estate and the $18 million are locked away in a legal vault, and you don't have the combination. The color drained entirely from Bradley's face. He opened his mouth to argue, to throw out some other legal term he had probably heard on an internet show, but nothing came out. The reality that he was walking away with absolutely nothing was finally sinking in. He had destroyed his marriage, sold a federally seized house, admitted to wire fraud, and lost his only financial lifeline, all in the span of a single morning, while I stood completely untouched and legally protected. Barbara let out a screech of pure rage. She lunged forward, her hands curling into claws, stopping just inches from my face. "That miserable old woman," she screamed, her carefully constructed upper-class mask shattering into a million pieces. "Your grandmother was a vicious, spiteful woman. She always hated my son. From the day of your rehearsal dinner, she looked at Bradley like he was dirt on the bottom of her shoe. She set this up deliberately, just to ruin him out of pure jealousy." I stood my ground, refusing to flinch at her fury. "My grandmother was the smartest woman I ever knew," I said, my voice low and dangerously steady. "She saw right through your fake designer bags and your leased luxury cars. The moment Bradley complained that her wedding gift to us was savings bonds instead of an envelope of cash, she knew he was a lazy, entitled parasite. She told me on my wedding day that I would outgrow him and his pathetic grand delusions. She locked that trust down because she knew that once the two of you bled through whatever money you stole from other people, you would come for mine." "How dare you speak to my mother like that?" Bradley roared, trying to claw back some control over the situation. "We gave you everything. We elevated your status in this town. You were nothing before you married into money. You used my excellent credit score to finance your ridiculous crypto mining rigs, Bradley, I fired back, refusing to look away. You took my annual corporate bonuses to pay for your mother's country club dues, because she was about to be kicked out for non-payment. You didn't elevate anything. You just bled me dry until you thought the well was empty. But you were wrong. You threw me away right before the real payday arrived. Barbara began hyperventilating again, her hands clutching at her pearls as if they were choking her. "We will fight this," she gasped, her eyes wide with a desperate frenzy. "I know judges in this county. I know powerful people on the board. We will find a loophole. No piece of paper is bulletproof, Dinah. There are always ways around things for people with connections." Right on cue, the deep, powerful rumble of a luxury engine shattered the quiet suburban street. A sleek, midnight black Mercedes-Benz rounded the corner into the driveway with an aggressive turn, its tires crunching heavily over the gravel. The car pulled up perfectly behind Bradley's leased sports car, blocking him in completely. The dark tint of the driver's side window rolled down, the engine cut off, and the heavy door swung open. A pair of sharp red stilettos stepped out onto the pavement, followed by an impeccably tailored slate-grey power suit. Jasmine stepped into the evening light. She was my sister-in-law, married to Bradley's younger brother, Kevin. A brilliant, no-nonsense corporate attorney, Jasmine commanded respect the moment she walked into any room. She adjusted her designer glasses, pulled a thick leather briefcase from the passenger seat, and slammed the car door with a heavy thud that echoed across the lawn. Barbara's frantic eyes locked onto Jasmine, and a sudden spark of desperate hope flickered across her wrinkled face. She gasped, immediately returning to her demanding, aristocratic demeanor, completely forgetting how she usually treated her other daughter-in-law.
"Dear Jasmine," Barbara barked, her voice echoing down the driveway. "Thank goodness you're here. You're a lawyer. I need you to do your duty for this family right now. Diana's trying to hide $18 million from your brother-in-law with some ridiculous irrevocable trust. I need you to find a loophole and break her trust fund immediately. Don't just stand there. Get to work."
Jasmine slowly turned her head toward her mother-in-law. The setting sun caught the edge of her gold-rimmed glasses, and she offered a smile that held absolutely no warmth. She adjusted her grip on her briefcase and walked forward, her heels clicking sharply on the driveway like a countdown timer. Barbara stepped directly into Jasmine's path, expecting absolute obedience from the woman she had treated like a second-class citizen for years. Jasmine didn't even slow down. She fluidly sidestepped the older woman, brushing past Barbara's expensive cashmere shawl as if she were walking past a coat rack. Barbara gasped in pure indignation. "Did you hear me, Jasmine?" she screamed, spinning around to face her daughter-in-law. "I gave you an order. You are a lawyer. You married my son Kevin, which means you owe this family your loyalty. Now find a loophole and break Diana's trust fund before she steals Bradley's rightful share." Jasmine ignored the frantic demands entirely. She walked straight to the porch where I was standing, stopped right by my side, and turned to face Bradley and Barbara. We stood shoulder to shoulder, a united front against the two culprits who had made our lives miserable for years. Jasmine placed her briefcase on the small patio table, popped the brass latches, and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, bound by a heavy blue legal clip. "Good evening, Dinah," Jasmine said, her voice carrying the crisp, authoritative tone of a senior corporate lawyer prepared to dismantle a hostile witness. "Apologies for being a bit late. Traffic from the courthouse was dreadful." "You arrived at the perfect time, Jasmine," I replied with a smile, watching the confusion spread across Bradley's sweating face. Bradley stared at the two of us, his arrogant posture wavering as his brain tried to compute what was happening. "What on earth is going on here?" he demanded, pointing a trembling finger at Jasmine. "Why are you talking to her like that? What are those papers?" Jasmine stepped forward and slammed the stack of documents directly against Bradley's chest. He caught them reflexively, holding the thick bundle as if it weighed 100 pounds. "Consider yourself officially served," Jasmine said, her voice ringing clearly across the lawn. "I am here today, acting as Diana's lead legal counsel. Those documents contain a formal court summons, an emergency injunction freezing all of your personal bank accounts, and a civil filing for severe financial abuse and fraud." Bradley's jaw dropped. He looked down at the legal seal on the documents, then back up at Jasmine. "You are her lawyer," he stammered, his voice cracking with panic. "You can't do this. This is a conflict of interest. I will report you to the State Bar Association. I will have your license revoked by tomorrow morning. Besides, Diana can't afford a partner at your firm." Jasmine let out a sharp laugh of genuine amusement. "Oh, Bradley, your understanding of the law is just as pathetic as your understanding of basic human decency. There is absolutely no conflict of interest because you are not my client. You have never been my client. As for my billing rate, I'm taking Diana's case entirely pro bono. I wouldn't miss the opportunity to legally dismantle you for anything in the world." Barbara shoved her way up the porch steps, her face flushed with pure rage. She pointed a manicured finger inches from Jasmine's face. "You ungrateful diversity hire," Barbara hissed, dropping any pretense of upper-class etiquette. "We allowed you into this prestigious family. We let you marry Kevin, and this is how you repay us? By turning on your own people. You are supposed to be protecting Bradley." Jasmine didn't flinch. She stepped into Barbara's space, her dark eyes burning with the years of suppressed anger that was finally being unleashed. "Let us get one thing straight, Barbara," Jasmine said, her voice low and dangerously calm. "You never allowed me anywhere. I remember my first Thanksgiving with this family. I remember you deliberately spilling hot gravy onto my shoes. I remember you pulling me into the kitchen to tell me that people like me only belonged as court clerks because we lacked the pedigree to be real corporate lawyers. You told me, with a fake smile on your face, that I was just a temporary phase for Kevin." Barbara swallowed hard, taking a defensive step back as Jasmine continued to press forward. "For 5 years I smiled and politely ate your dry turkey while listening to your passive-aggressive remarks about my hair, my clothes, and my background." Jasmine's words cut through the night air like a knife. "You thought I was weak. You thought because I kept the peace, I was submitting to your supposed superiority. But I wasn't submitting, Barbara. I was building a case. So let this sink into your elitist brain. This former court clerk just filed a federal restraining order on every single dime your golden boy son has ever touched." Bradley waved his divorce papers in the air, desperately trying to reclaim his leverage. "It doesn't matter what you filed, Jasmine," he shouted, his voice shaking with desperation. "I already told Diana the law. We are still legally married. I filed these papers today, but the divorce isn't final. Half of that $18 million trust belongs to the marriage. I will fight this in probate court until she hands over my $9 million. Jasmine looked at him with an expression of pure pity. "Bradley, do you honestly think I would file an injunction without verifying the status of her inheritance first? I personally reviewed Diana's grandmother's trust documents. She established an irrevocable trust with an airtight spendthrift clause. That money is protected under federal trust law. Creditors and hostile spouses trying to claim marital assets cannot touch it. You have absolutely no legal standing to claim a single penny of her $18 million. You are legally, mathematically, and financially finished." Bradley stumbled backward, gripping the porch railing as his financial delusions evaporated into thin air. He looked at the IRS notice on the ground, then at the freezing order in his hands. He was cornered with no money, no house, and no leverage. "Mom, do something!" Bradley wailed, turning to Barbara like a helpless child. "Call your friends on the judicial panel. Call the country club board. We have to stop this before Barbara could even reach into her bag for her phone. A loud, aggressive engine sound shattered the quiet neighborhood. The screech of cheap tires on asphalt echoed down the street. A bright pink Fiat rounded the corner, speeding down the road. It didn't slow down as it neared our driveway. Instead, the driver swerved sharply, forcing the small car over the concrete curb. The Fiat tore across Barbara's perfectly manicured front lawn, ripping up large chunks of green sod and throwing mud into the air. The car slammed into park right in the middle of the yard, stopping inches from Bradley's leased sports car.
The driver's side door flew open, slamming hard against its hinges, and Brittany stepped out. She was 24 years old, wearing a tight velour tracksuit, and she was heavily pregnant.
Brittany marched across the ruined lawn, her face contorted with panic and fury. She pointed straight at Bradley. "Bradley, you lying piece of garbage!" Brittany screamed, her voice echoing down the street for every neighbor to hear. "My landlord just kicked my door down and seized my entire apartment. They took everything. Where is the money for the house you promised to buy me?" Bradley stumbled back, his hands raised defensively as Brittany advanced across the destroyed grass. The mud from Barbara's ruined yard clung to her white platform sneakers, but Brittany didn't care. She marched straight up the porch steps, shoving her finger hard into Bradley's chest. "You told me the wire transfer would hit this afternoon," Brittany shrieked, her voice high enough to make the neighborhood dogs bark. "You told me you were selling this dump, and we were going to use the cash to pay off my debts before the baby came." "My people don't play around, Bradley. They just kicked my door in. They took my car. They took my furniture. I am sleeping on an air mattress tonight. Hand over the cash right now." Bradley frantically tried to quiet her down, his eyes darting between me, Jasmine, and his mother. "Brittany, shut up," he hissed, grabbing her wrist to stop her from pounding on his chest. "Not right now. The sale didn't go through. It is complicated. The IRS is involved. Keep your voice down." "Complicated?" Brittany looked ready to boil over, ripping her hand away from his grip. "I am carrying your son, your heir. You promised me a life of luxury. You promised me a mansion in the suburbs." At the word son, Barbara snapped out of her shock. Her eyes widened, her gaze dropping instantly to Brittany's prominent belly. The elitist disgust on Barbara's face was instantly replaced by a twisted, desperate look of calculation. A male heir, a continuation of her precious family line. Barbara straightened her posture, completely ignoring the velour tracksuit, the aggressive tone, and the mentions of unpaid debts.
"A boy," Barbara breathed, her tone shifting from sheer terror to arrogant entitlement. She stepped past her panicked son to stand beside the furious mistress, staring at the stomach as if it were a winning lottery ticket.
Then Barbara turned her furious gaze directly onto me. "Did you hear that, Diana?" Barbara demanded, her chest puffing out with delusional righteousness. "Bradley is finally getting the family he deserves. A strong male heir, something you are utterly incapable of providing for him. Since you are selfishly hoarding your millions, and trapped my son in a dead-end marriage for years, you owe this child. I demand that you set up a comprehensive child support trust for my grandson immediately. You have $18 million sitting in an account doing nothing, paying for the private education, the healthcare, and the upbringing of this family's first male heir is the bare minimum you can do to make up for your massive failures as a wife." Jasmine let out a sharp laugh of disbelief beside me, but I just smiled. It was a masterclass in narcissistic delusion for Barbara to try and extort my inheritance to fund her cheating son's child. She truly believed my grandmother's money belonged to her family line. Before I could even formulate a response to this performance, Brittany snapped her head around. She stared at me, then at Barbara, and finally leveled a lethal glare at Bradley. $18 million? Brittany asked, her voice dropping its frantic edge, replaced by pure shock. What is she talking about? Why is she talking about divorce settlements and inheritances? Brittany pointed a trembling finger at me, her acrylic nail nearly brushing my shoulder. You told me she was dying. A dead silence fell over the porch. Even Barbara stopped breathing, her eyes darting to her son. What did you just say? I asked, my tone deceptively light, though a cold fury was pooling in my chest. Brittany turned back to Bradley, hitting him hard on the arm. You told me she had a terminal illness, Bradley. You swore to me 6 months ago that your wife was terribly sick and only had weeks left to live. You cried in my bed. You sobbed about how painful it was to watch her fade away. You said we had to keep our relationship completely secret until she passed because you didn't want to break her heart in her final days. You told me that as soon as the inevitable happened, we would get married, keep this big house,
and live off the massive life insurance policy.
Jasmine shook her head in absolute disgust, adjusting the strap of her briefcase. Bradley hadn't just cheated. He had fabricated a terminal illness to keep his desperate mistress on the hook, while keeping me around just long enough to try and steal my grandmother's assets. He was an absolute sociopath. Bradley looked like he was about to throw up. He was backed against the front door, trapped between his furious mistress, his demanding mother, his shark of a sister-in-law, and me. Brittany, baby, please, let me explain, Bradley pleaded, sweating profusely as he held his hands up in surrender. I just needed time to get the assets sorted out. I was protecting us. You are sick, I said, my voice cutting through his pathetic whimpering. You are an absolute psychopath, Bradley, but the most hilarious part of this tragedy is that you aren't the only one telling vicious lies today. I turned around and walked down the wooden steps of the porch, my leather tote bag heavy on my shoulder. Walking right past the mud tracks in the driveway, I stopped at the front hood of Bradley's overpriced sports car. I unzipped my bag, pulled out my silver laptop, and laid it flat against the polished hood, flipping open the screen. "What are you doing?" Bradley demanded, hesitantly walking down the stairs as his panic shifted to a new threat. "Get off my car. As a forensic accountant, I possess a very specific set of skills," I announced, typing my password into the keyboard with quick precision. "I don't just track missing bank transfers. I track all digital paper trails. I track timelines, invoices, and hidden liabilities. When Jasmine and I began preparing this lawsuit against you, we dug up absolutely everything. Every text message, every bank statement, every clinic visit. Jasmine legally subpoenaed the billing portal records of the boutique OBGYN clinic, where you have been paying out of pocket for Brittany's premium prenatal care." Brittany froze on the porch steps, her hands instinctively dropping to protect her stomach. "You violated my medical records," she screamed. "It is a subpoena," Jasmine barked from the porch, crossing her arms. "Completely legal when establishing a timeline for marital infidelity, financial dissipation, and unauthorized use of marital funds." I turned the laptop screen around so it faced the porch. The bright display showed a high-resolution ultrasound image, flanked by a highly detailed, legally obtained medical billing invoice bearing Brittany's name. "I am not interested in your health history, Brittany," I said, leaning casually against the sports car. "I am only interested in the math. Math is universal. Math is objective. Math does not lie." "Bradley, you told me you met Brittany exactly 5 months ago at a crypto networking event in Miami. The credit card receipts from the hotel bar, your flight logs, and your text history all confirm that exact date." I tapped the screen, highlighting a prominent, undeniable number at the top of the official medical documentation. "But according to this official clinic invoice from your appointment last week, Brittany is currently 7 months pregnant." I looked up, meeting Bradley's horrified, uncomprehending gaze, letting the silence stretch for several agonizing seconds. "You have known her for 5 months, Bradley. Do the math." Bradley stared at the glowing laptop screen. His eyes darted between the digital invoice with Brittany's name and the bold number 7 printed next to the gestational age. His head turned slowly toward Brittany, the arrogant bluster completely draining from his body, replaced by a hollow realization. He looked at her tight velour tracksuit, at the prominent stomach she was suddenly trying to shield with her arms, and the math finally added up in his mind. 5 months. 7 months pregnant. A choked sound escaped Bradley's throat. He took a step toward her, his fists clenching so hard his knuckles turned white. "You lied to me!" he roared, his voice cracking with pure rage. "You told me it was my son. You told me we conceived during our first weekend in Miami." Brittany took a defensive step back, her platform sneakers slipping in the mud she had tracked onto the driveway.
"So what?" she snapped, completely dropping the panicked victim act as her tone turned instantly venomous. "You lied to me too, Bradley. You told me you were a multi-millionaire. You told me your wife was in hospice. You promised me an estate and a trust fund. You were just a gullible sucker in a cheap suit trying to play big."
"I'm not paying for another man's child," Bradley screamed, lunging forward, his hand shaking as he pointed inches from her face. "You calculating gold digger, you set me up, you used me to pay off your massive debts." "I wanted a free ride, and I wanted the cash you promised me," Brittany screamed right back, slapping his hand away violently. "I don't care whose name is on the birth certificate, and my people don't care either. You forged real estate documents today, Bradley. You owe me that money. Hand it over right now, or I swear to God I will give your current address to the people who took my car. They will break your legs long before the IRS gets to you." The shouting match escalated into a deafening roar. Brittany pressed into his space, poking his chest with her acrylic nails, demanding cash he no longer possessed, while Bradley backed away, shouting profanities, completely consumed by the fact that his perfect male heir was a total lie. Jasmine stood next to me, her arms crossed, watching the spectacular implosion of the man who had tormented me for years. Then Barbara decided she had seen enough. Her entire world was collapsing. Her stolen house was seized, her son was exposed as a broke fraud, and the precious grandson she had claimed seconds ago was a biological impossibility. She needed the confrontation to end immediately. Barbara let out a dramatic gasp. Clutching the collar of her expensive cashmere shawl, she pressed her other hand flat against her chest. She stumbled sideways against the wooden porch pillar, sliding down until she was sitting on the top step, panting heavily. "My heart!" Barbara wailed, her eyes squeezed shut. "My chest! I can't breathe. Bradley, the stress is too much. Call an ambulance. I am having a heart attack." Bradley froze, temporarily distracted from his altercation with Brittany. He turned to his mother, panic flitting across his face. "Mom!" He patted his pockets again, searching for the phone he had dropped earlier on the porch. "Someone call 911, he shouted. Jasmine didn't move a muscle. I simply reached forward, closed my laptop and slid it back into my tote bag. "Nobody is calling an ambulance," I said, my voice cutting clearly over Barbara's pathetic groans. "Are you insane?" Bradley shouted, dropping to his knees beside her. "She is going into cardiac arrest." "She is throwing a temper tantrum," I corrected him, stepping closer to the porch. I looked down at my mother-in-law, who was peeking at me through half-open eyes. "I've seen this exact medical emergency before, Barbara. Remember when we were planning the wedding 3 years ago? The catering bill arrived, and it was $20,000 more than you expected. You'd promised to pay for it, but the second the invoice was placed in your hand, you clutched your chest, gasped for air, and claimed you were in heart failure. You ruined the entire tasting session, demanded to be taken to the ER, and then, the absolute second Bradley paid the caterer using our joint savings account, you made a miraculous recovery." Jasmine let out a sharp laugh. "She pulled the same stunt last Thanksgiving when she was asked to account for the charity gala funds," Jasmine added, her voice full of satisfaction. "It is a documented pattern of avoidance. If you call an ambulance, Bradley, the first responders are going to charge you $3,000 for the ride, and I assure you, your bank accounts are currently frozen solid. You can't even afford the copay." Barbara's groaning stopped instantly. She snapped her eyes open, glaring up at me with pure venom. She dropped her hand from her chest, the medical emergency instantly vanishing, as she realized her ultimate escape tactic had failed. She sat on the porch step, her breathing perfectly normal, completely humiliated. Brittany wasn't done. She marched up the stairs, completely ignoring Barbara, and grabbed the lapels of Bradley's blazer. "I don't care about her fake heart attack," Brittany screamed directly into his face. "And I don't care about your frozen accounts. You took my youth. You promised me security. You transfer that house money into my account right now, or I am calling the men who took my car." Jasmine tapped her leather briefcase against her leg. "Just so we're clear, Bradley, any attempt to wire funds will be flagged as a direct violation of a federal injunction. That instantly elevates this to a major felony." Bradley was trapped. He looked at Brittany, her eyes wide with desperate malice. He looked at Jasmine, who held the legal authority to send him away for a very long time. He looked at his mother sitting on the stairs, completely powerless, and broke. He was backed into a corner, terrified, with absolutely nowhere left to turn. His breathing grew heavy. His eyes darted around the yard, searching for a scapegoat, a shield to hide behind. His survival instinct kicked in, raw and ruthless. He violently pushed Brittany aside, backing up until he hit the driveway gate. He raised a trembling hand, but he didn't point it at me or at Brittany. He pointed it straight at his mother, sitting on the porch steps. "Don't look at me!" Bradley screamed, his voice cracking hysterically. "Don't blame this on me. Mum's the one who stole the money from Dad's charity foundation. She took millions. She forced me to sell this house today, just to hide the cash before the auditors show up next week. It was her idea. She's the mastermind. Take her." Barbara looked up at her son from the porch steps. Pure shock washed over her tightly pulled face, her fake heart attack completely forgotten. For a moment, the only sound in the yard was the rhythmic ticking of Bradley's cooling sports car engine, and the heavy breathing of his furious mistress. The golden boy, the perfect heir Barbara had adored and protected for years at my expense, had just served her up on a silver platter to save his own skin. "You ungrateful little rat," Barbara whispered, her voice shaking with genuine venom. "I paid for your law school. I bought your cars. I bailed you out of massive gambling debts. How dare you point your finger at me? You signed the wire transfers, Bradley. Your name is on the offshore accounts. You're sinking just as fast as I am. Brittany looked at both of them with total disgust. You people are absolute monsters. She spat, stepping away from Bradley as if he were radioactive. I'm taking my Fiat and leaving. I'm calling my people. I'm telling them exactly where you both sleep. Before Brittany could even turn toward her wrecked pink car, a faint sound cut through the tense neighborhood air. From a few blocks away, the sharp wail of sirens echoed. Police sirens. Bradley's head snapped toward the street. The sirens weren't passing by. They were growing louder. They were multiplying. The distant wails swelled into a dense, urgent chorus of alarms, descending directly upon our quiet suburban cul-de-sac. No! Bradley gasped, his eyes widening with the panic of a cornered animal. No, this can't be happening. I need more time. He abandoned his mother on the stairs. He abandoned his pregnant mistress on the lawn. He turned and lunged toward his leased sports car, frantically digging through the pockets of his custom suit for his keys. He was going to run. He was going to leave everyone behind, trying to vanish before the flashing lights reached the driveway. I moved faster. I stepped directly into his path, blocking the driver's side door. I reached into my oversized leather tote bag and pulled out a massive 300-page binder. I slammed it flat onto the hood of his sports car with a deafening thud. The sheer weight of the paperwork made the expensive metal groan. Get out of the way, Diana! Bradley screamed, his face bright red and dripping with sweat. He tried to push past me, but I planted my feet firmly on the pavement. Get out of my way, you stupid, glorified calculator! You have no idea what's happening right now. The police are coming. Move! I didn't even flinch. I pressed my hand flat against the massive binder, staring straight into his terrified, desperate eyes. I know exactly what's happening, Bradley, I said, my voice cutting clearly over the approaching sirens. I know perfectly well, because I orchestrated all of it. And I highly suggest you stop insulting the glorified calculator who just personally dismantled your entire life. Bradley stared at the thick binder, his breath coming in short gasps. What is that? He demanded, his voice cracking under the pressure. This is a comprehensive, line-by-line forensic audit of your entire financial existence, I replied, tapping the heavy plastic cover. I spent the last 6 months digging through the digital trash you thought you deleted. You thought you were incredibly clever, Bradley. You thought because you went to a few crypto seminars and used encrypted messaging apps, you couldn't be traced. But you were arrogant, and arrogant men always make mistakes. Barbara pushed herself up from the porch steps, her face as white as a sheet. What did you do, Diana? She demanded, her voice trembling. I did my job, Barbara, I said, keeping my eyes locked on Bradley. My calculator tracked your precious son's illegal wire transfers down to the very last penny. I found the shell companies. I found the fake vendor invoices you used to drain money from your husband's charity foundation. I tracked the digital footprint of every single dollar, watching them move from the charity accounts to 3 different decentralized crypto exchanges, and then straight into the offshore accounts you hid in the Cayman Islands. Bradley opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a custom suit. Did you two seriously think the IRS wouldn't notice a $3 million discrepancy suddenly appearing in a tax-exempt charitable foundation? I pressed on, refusing to give him a moment to breathe. You thought you could force me to sign this house over to you today for pennies on the dollar, then use the cash to plug the hole before next week's quarterly audit. But I'm always 3 steps ahead of you, Bradley. I finished my forensic audit 2 weeks ago. Jasmine packaged it into a beautiful airtight legal file, and we handed it directly to the federal government. Sektavitzbat now, the sun and ton. You turned me in? Bradley whispered, his legs giving out as he leaned against his car to keep from falling. You turned in your own husband. I'm not your husband, Bradley. My voice was ice cold. You're a thief who thought my inheritance was a get-out-of-jail-free card. You're a liar who fabricated a terminal illness just to string along a mistress. And you're a coward who just tried to throw his own mother into a federal cell to save himself. The sirens were deafening now. They roared down our street, echoing off the brick houses and rattling the windows. Flashing red and blue lights cast harsh strobe-like colours across the manicured lawns. Bradley spun around, looking frantically down the street. He grabbed the car door handle, pulling violently, but Jasmine had already pressed the remote lock when he dropped his keys on the porch earlier. The car was dead. 2 massive black federal SUVs swung sharply into the driveway. Their tyres screeched against the pavement, stopping just inches from Brittany's abandoned pink Fiat. A local police cruiser pulled in directly behind them, completely blocking the exit. There was no escape, nowhere left to run. The heavy doors of the SUVs swung open simultaneously. 6 agents wearing tactical vests stamped with bright yellow letters, reading IRSCI, Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation, stepped into the night air. They didn't look like the local patrol cops Bradley was used to bribing at charity galas. They were federal criminal investigators, and their faces were stone cold. "Bradley Wilson and Barbara Wilson," the lead agent barked, his voice carrying an absolute, terrifying authority over the dying sirens. He unclipped a heavy pair of steel handcuffs from his tactical belt and stepped directly onto Barbara's ruined, muddy lawn. "Put your hands where we can see them right now. Do not move a single muscle. You are both under arrest for federal wire fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement of charitable funds." Barbara let out a sharp, genuine shriek of terror. Her legs buckled as 2 federal agents strode up the porch steps, grabbing her arms and pinning them behind her back, her expensive cashmere shawl slipping from her shoulders. The satisfying click of steel handcuffs echoed across the porch. Bradley didn't scream. He simply slid down the side of his locked sports car until he was sitting on the hard pavement of the driveway. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, hollow, and completely broken. The arrogant golden boy was gone. The master manipulator was gone. All that was left was a pathetic, ruined man who had finally met an opponent he couldn't outsmart. I stood tall, zipping my laptop back into my tote bag and adjusting the strap on my shoulder. I gave him one last look, feeling nothing but a deep, overwhelming sense of peace. "Checkmate, Bradley," I said softly. I turned and walked over to Jasmine, watching as the federal agents hoisted my ex-husband off the pavement and dragged him toward the waiting SUV. The reign of the Wilson family was officially over. The federal agents hauled Bradley up from the pavement by his armpits. His custom Italian loafers scraped uselessly against the concrete as they pressed him face down against the side of his leased sports car. The lead IRS agent moved in right behind him, securing the heavy steel cuffs around Bradley's wrists. Bradley twisted his neck, his slicked-back hair falling over his panicked eyes. Realizing the absolute gravity of his situation, he immediately reached for the only weapon he had left. His charm. "Wait, just hold on a second. There has been a massive misunderstanding here, officer," Bradley pleaded. He lowered his voice, adopting a smooth, calm, and deeply sympathetic tone. The agent spun him around to face forward. Bradley locked eyes with the federal investigator, trying to look like a rational, calm victim caught in a bizarre trap. "You have to listen to me. I'm a respected corporate attorney in this city. You're being manipulated by a deeply disturbed woman." The agent crossed his thick arms over his tactical vest, his face entirely blank. "Go on," the agent said coldly. Bradley took a deep breath, smoothing out his panicked expression and replacing it with a mask of pure, long, suffering patience. It was the exact same look, the same sickeningly sweet tone he had used 7 years ago. I remembered that tone vividly. It was the voice he used when he called my college roommates, one by one, to tell them I was suffering from severe paranoia and overwork. He had convinced my entire support network that I was mentally unstable and needed to be isolated for my own well-being. With that exact same compassionate smile, he had systematically cut me off from everyone who cared about me.
"My wife, Diana, is going through a terrible psychological breakdown." Bradley lied smoothly, shaking his head with a look of manufactured grief. "She's hysterical, and she's deeply bitter. She recently found out that I filed for divorce, and she completely lost touch with reality. She's a forensic accountant. She handled all of our family taxes. She had access to all of my passwords. She engineered this entire offshore embezzlement scheme just to frame me and my mother."
To destroy us. This is a malicious setup by a sick, resentful spouse. I stood at the edge of the lawn, side by side with Jasmine, watching the performance. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The lead agent stared at Bradley for a long, heavy moment. The red and blue lights of the federal vehicles strobed across the agent's stoic face. Slowly, he reached into the pocket of his tactical vest and pulled out a small, rugged digital tablet. He tapped the glowing screen twice. "That's a fascinating story, Mr. Wilson," the agent replied, his voice dripping with dry, bureaucratic irony. "It really is. Unfortunately, it doesn't account for the digital biometric prints attached to the encrypted offshore accounts. Your wife might be an accountant, but unless she physically severed your thumb and used it to authorize 7 separate wire transfers to the Cayman Islands from your personal smartphone, your story is complete garbage." Bradley's jaw dropped. The charming, sympathetic mask shattered instantly, leaving nothing but pure, unadulterated terror. He stared at the federal agent as if the man was speaking an alien language. "We have your IP address, Mr. Wilson," the agent continued, stepping closer, right into Bradley's face. "We have the precise geolocation signal from your private phone at the exact moments the charity funds were moved. We also have the encrypted text messages between you and your mother discussing tax evasion strategies. Your charm might work in country club boardrooms, but it means absolutely nothing against federal forensic data. Get ready for federal prison." Barbara, who was being aggressively marched toward the second federal SUV, heard her son's pathetic attempt to shift the blame. She dug her heels into the grass, fighting against the 2 agents holding her arms. By now, the neighbors had all stepped out onto their porches, documenting the spectacular downfall of the neighborhood's most arrogant residents. "You threw me to the wolves to save your mistress, and now you're trying to frame your own wife," Barbara shrieked, completely losing her aristocratic composure. "You spineless, incompetent fool. I should have let you drown in your gambling debts. You ruined this family." "Shut up, Mom!" Bradley screamed back, straining against the agent, pinning him to the car. "Don't say another word. You're giving them a confession in front of the entire neighborhood." Brittany watched the entire scene from the ruined lawn, her arms wrapped protectively around her pregnant belly. Her face was pale with sheer shock. The wealthy, powerful man she thought was going to rescue her from violent loan sharks was currently sobbing on the hood of a sports car, screaming at his handcuffed mother in the middle of a federal raid. Brittany silently backed away, slipping behind her pink Fiat, realizing she needed to vanish before the federal agents decided to seize whatever assets she had left. The lead agent grabbed Bradley by the shoulder, shoving him toward the first SUV. "Put him in the back," the agent ordered the arresting officers. "Let him ride downtown to the holding facility with his mother. Maybe they can practice their cover stories together on the highway." Bradley sobbed openly as they pressed his head down, forcing him into the rear seat of the darkened vehicle. The heavy door closed with a final metallic thud, sealing him inside his mobile cage. The lead agent adjusted his heavy tactical vest, let out a slow breath, and turned around. He walked across the muddy, ruined lawn, stepping carefully over the tire tracks left by Brittany, and approached where Jasmine and I were standing. He stopped directly in front of me, his stern, intimidating demeanor instantly softening. He extended a broad hand. I took it, returning a firm, steady handshake. "Thank you, ma'am," the agent said, his voice filled with genuine professional respect. "The file you provided was flawless. We rarely see an audit package documented this meticulously. Your work essentially handed us a $3 million embezzlement ring on a silver platter." "I was just doing my civic duty," I replied, offering a polite, calm smile. The agent nodded, his eyes reflecting absolute approval. "As an official IRS whistleblower, your immunity is guaranteed, and your reward of 15% of the seized assets is currently being processed." I processed his words as the flashing red and blue lights illuminated his face. 15% of millions of dollars in seized offshore assets. I hadn't just escaped a toxic, financially abusive marriage. I was walking away with a massive, federally mandated fortune for bringing down a criminal enterprise. A slow, triumphant smile spread across my face as I shook his hand, finally feeling the suffocating weight of the last 5 years lift off my shoulders. But the moment of quiet satisfaction was shattered instantly by a piercing, hysterical shriek from the porch. Barbara wasn't going quietly. The absolute humiliation of being treated like a common criminal had finally overridden her shock. As two federal agents tried to guide her down the steps, Barbara slammed her expensive heels into the wood and twisted her body violently. With surprising strength for a woman her age, she ripped her right arm free. Before the agents could grab her again, she reached deep into her cashmere shawl and yanked out her smartphone. She brandished the device like a weapon, pointing it directly at the federal investigators. "Gah! Get your filthy hands off me right now!" Barbara screamed, her voice echoing off the neighboring houses. "Do you have any idea who I am? I am Barbara Wilson. I sit on the hospital's executive board. I host the mayor's charity galas. I am high society in this town. You're making a catastrophic, career-ending mistake." The federal agents looked entirely unmoved by her outburst. They stepped forward to subdue her, but Barbara frantically tapped at her screen, backing up against the front door. "I'm calling Commissioner Miller right now," Barbara threatened, her chest heaving as she dialed. "He is a very close personal friend of mine. We play tennis at the country club every single Sunday. I personally funded his entire re-election campaign. When he hears that rogue federal agents are harassing me on my private property, every single one of you will be fired before midnight." Jasmine stepped forward, her high heels clicking sharply against the driveway pavement. She looked up at the frantic, cornered older woman with a mixture of absolute pity and surgically precise triumph. "You don't own anything anymore, Barbara," Jasmine said, her voice cutting through the yard's commotion. "And you certainly don't have any friends left to call." Barbara froze, her thumb hovering just above the dial pad. She glared down at Jasmine, her chest heaving. "What are you talking about, you arrogant little girl?" Barbara spat, trying to maintain her superior posture. "My social circle is untouchable." Jasmine let out a dark, melodic laugh that sent a chill through the evening air. "You remember that mandatory country club board meeting you skipped this morning to come here and harass Diana? They didn't miss you, Barbara. In fact, they had plenty of reading material to keep them completely occupied. At exactly 8 o'clock this morning, I personally emailed a digital, unredacted copy of Diana's entire forensic audit to every single member of the country club board." Barbara's face went slack. The phone trembled in her hand. "But I didn't stop there," Jasmine continued, walking right to the base of the porch steps. "I also blind copied the hospital's charity committee, the mayor's office, and the managing editor of the local newspaper. They saw where the money went, Barbara. They saw the fake vendor invoices you created out of thin air. They saw, in clear black and white, how you siphoned millions of dollars meant for a new pediatric cancer wing and diverted those funds directly into your offshore accounts to pay for your luxury European vacations and Bradley's pathetic gambling debts." "No," Barbara whispered, her voice barely audible over the idling engines of the federal SUVs. "No, that was confidential information. You can't do that. It's called whistleblowing," Jasmine corrected her sharply. "And it's entirely legal. For the last 10 hours, your entire social circle has known you're a common thief. They saw the bank statements. They saw the forged signatures. Your country club membership was officially revoked before noon today." Barbara stared at Jasmine in utter horror. Desperate for a shred of validation, she looked down at her phone screen. She opened her messages, pulling up the group chat for her elite country club circle. She frantically typed a single word, begging for help. A small red exclamation point immediately popped up next to the text. She was blocked. She checked the charity committee thread. Blocked. Her carefully constructed world of high society had completely frozen her out the exact second they saw the undeniable mathematical proof in my audit. "It's a lie," Barbara hyperventilated, shaking her head violently as she backed into the porch railing. "Commissioner Miller will fix this. He knows I'm a good person. He knows I'm the victim of a vicious, jealous daughter-in-law." She pressed the call button on her phone and held it to her ear, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped the device on the porch. Just as the phone began to ring, a loud, aggressive siren pierced the neighborhood tension. A brand new, state-of-the-art local police cruiser whipped around the corner, speeding down the street with its lights illuminating the darkened trees. The cruiser pulled directly up to the curb, boxing in the federal SUVs and completely sealing off the driveway. The heavy door of the cruiser swung open. Commissioner Miller stepped into the flashing lights, wearing his crisp, dark uniform. He looked around, taking in the chaotic scene on the lawn, his expression completely unreadable. Barbara's face lit up with pure, unadulterated relief. The delusion returned to her eyes in an instant. She dropped her phone on the wooden porch, pushed past the 2 federal agents, and stumbled down the stairs. She practically ran across the muddy grass, extending her manicured hands toward the approaching police commissioner.
Commissioner Miller, Barbara cried, a hysterical smile stretching across her face. Thank goodness you're here. Tell these rogue agents who I am. Tell them this is a massive mistake and order them to take the cuffs off my son immediately. We are innocent.
Commissioner Miller didn't speak. He didn't smile. He didn't even break his firm, marching stride. He walked straight across the driveway, passing directly by Barbara as if she were completely transparent. He ignored her outstretched, trembling hands entirely, leaving her standing in the dirt like a forgotten ghost. Barbara gasped, spinning around to watch him walk away from her. Commissioner Miller stopped directly in front of the lead IRS agent. He reached into the breast pocket of his uniform jacket and pulled out a folded, thick document bearing an official state seal. He handed it directly to the federal investigator. "Thank you for securing the perimeter, sir," Miller announced, his voice carrying clearly across the lawn for Barbara, Bradley, and every neighbor to hear. "This is a state-level secondary warrant for Barbara Wilson. State charges for grand larceny, wire fraud, and embezzlement of charitable funds have been officially filed." Barbara was absolutely paralyzed as the heavy parchment of the state warrant changed hands. The sheer impossibility of the moment shattered her perfectly lifted face into a mask of pure terror. Her beloved tennis partner, the man whose political campaign she had funded with stolen charity money, had just driven the final nail into her coffin. Commissioner Miller didn't even give her a parting glance. He simply turned on his polished leather shoes and walked back to his cruiser, leaving her in the dirt with her wrists pinned behind her back. The federal agent stepped up, gripping her arms firmly. They began to march her toward the second dark SUV. Barbara stumbled, her designer shoes slipping on the wet grass. For the first time in her pampered, insulated life, she had no leverage. She had no favors left to call in. Her social circle had blocked her number. Her oldest son had tried to frame her, and the police commissioner had served up her arrest warrant on a silver platter. Just as an agent reached for the handle of the SUV door, a pair of headlights swept across the chaotic lawn. A dark grey sedan, practical and impeccably clean, turned sharply into the cul-de-sac. It navigated around the flashing federal vehicles and parked at an angle across the street, blocking the last possible exit route. The driver's door opened. Kevin stepped into the harsh glare of the police lights. He looked nothing like his brother. Where Bradley wore custom Italian suits and slicked-back hair, Kevin wore a simple button-down shirt and a weathered canvas jacket. He had a quiet, grounded presence, the presence of a man who built his life on real, hard work rather than manipulation.
He closed the door and walked up the driveway, his eyes scanning the scene. He looked at Bradley, who was currently locked in the back of a federal vehicle, crying silently against the tinted glass. He looked at me, standing tall near the porch. He looked at his wife, Jasmine, who gave him a reassuring nod.
Then Kevin looked at his mother. Barbara saw him and immediately shifted her entire demeanor. The vicious, cornered animal was gone. In its place was the ultimate victim. She let out a desperate, theatrical sob, her knees buckling just enough to force the federal agents to physically hold her up. "Kevin!" Barbara wailed, her voice cracking with manufactured despair. "Oh, my sweet boy! Thank goodness you're here. This is a nightmare, a complete misunderstanding. They are treating your mother like a common criminal. You have to help me." Kevin stopped a few feet away from her. He crossed his arms over his chest, his face entirely devoid of the sympathy she was desperately looking for. "Tell them who I am, Kevin," she pleaded, straining against the handcuffs. "Tell them I am a pillar of this community. Kevin, listen to me carefully. You need to call your bank right now. You and Jasmine have savings. I know you do. You need to wire whatever amount is necessary to bail me out. Bradley is compromised, but you can fix this. You have to empty your accounts and get me out of here before they take me downtown for processing." A dead silence descended on the yard after her demand. The only sound was the low hum of the police engines and the static burst of a federal agent's radio. Kevin stared at his mother. He didn't yell. He didn't lose his temper. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet, carrying a cold, heavy finality that made Barbara flinch. "Empty my accounts?" Kevin asked, tilting his head slightly. "You want me to empty my savings for you, just like you emptied my college fund 10 years ago?" Barbara froze. The fake tears dried instantly. The colour drained completely from her neck up to her hairline. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice suddenly thin. "Your college fund was lost in the stock market crash. We discussed this a decade ago. It was a tragedy, but we all made sacrifices." Kevin took a slow step forward, closing the distance until he was looking straight into her terrified eyes. "Do not lie to me today," Kevin said, his voice dropping an octave. "Don't ever lie to me again. I spent 10 years believing that story about the stock market. I spent 10 years working double shifts, waiting tables, stocking shelves, and pulling all-nighters just to pay for state college. I took on massive, crushing student loans that Jasmine and I are still paying off to this day. I thought we were broke. But you weren't broke, were you, Mother?" Barbara shook her head frantically, glancing at the federal agents who were listening to every word. "Kevin, please, this is not the time." "This is exactly the time," Kevin snapped back, his calm facade cracking just enough to reveal decades of buried fury underneath. Jasmine and Diana dug through those offshore accounts. They didn't just find the missing charity money, they found the complete transaction history from 10 years ago. I know exactly where my tuition went. Bradley had a DUI during his senior year of law school. He crashed his leased sports car into a storefront. He was facing jail time and permanent disbarment before his career even started. Inside the rear of the SUV, Bradley buried his face in his hands. "You couldn't let your golden boy face the consequences," Kevin continued, his voice ringing across the lawn. "So you quietly drained my entire college trust fund. You used every single penny of my money to pay off the shop owner, bribe the local magistrate, and completely erase Bradley's criminal record. You stole my future to protect a drunk driver. Then you looked me in the eye and told me the money evaporated in the recession. You watched me struggle for a decade while you bought Bradley a brand new car as a graduation present." "I did it for the family," Barbara whispered frantically, her eyes darting around the yard. "I had to protect our name. You have to understand, Kevin. You're my son. You owe me your loyalty." "I don't owe you a single thing," Kevin said flatly. He unzipped the front pocket of his canvas jacket. Barbara watched him hungrily, a tiny spark of delusion reigniting in her eyes. For one brief second, she actually believed her youngest son was reaching for a checkbook. She believed that a lifetime of conditioned family loyalty would force him to save her. Kevin didn't pull out a checkbook. He pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. He extended it, and since her hands were securely cuffed behind her back, he tapped the envelope gently against Barbara's chest. The federal agent standing next to her smoothly reached out and took it on her behalf. "What is that?" Barbara asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It's a civil lawsuit," Kevin answered, stepping back to stand beside his wife. "Jasmine drew it up this morning. We are suing you for the exact amount of the stolen tuition, plus 10 years of compounded interest, punitive damages, and severe emotional distress. You wanted me to pay for your bail. Instead, I am filing a lien against any remaining assets the federal government doesn't seize first." Kevin reached down and took Jasmine's hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. He looked at his mother with absolute, devastating indifference. "Have a safe ride downtown, Mother," Kevin said. "I hear the food inside is terrible." The federal agents practically dragged Barbara toward the second SUV. She didn't look back. The heavy doors slammed shut in rapid succession, sealing both mother and son inside their respective federal cages. Kevin watched them go, his expression unreadable, before wrapping a protective arm around Jasmine's waist. The engines roared to life, and the convoy pulled away, their red and blue lights fading into the night. They left behind an incredibly quiet, muddy driveway, but the silence didn't last long. The harsh glare of modified high beams suddenly cut through the evening shadows. A battered matte black SUV swung aggressively into the cul-de-sac, its engine revving with a low, threatening rumble. It bounced over the curb and parked at a sharp angle, completely boxing in Brittany's ruined pink Fiat.
4 heavily built men stepped into the cool night air. They wore thick leather jackets and dark boots, their faces partially obscured by shadows. They didn't say a word, but their synchronized, heavy footsteps as they walked up the driveway radiated an absolute air of menace.
Brittany let out a sharp, genuine gasp. She backed away from her car, her platform sneakers slipping on the damp, ruined grass. She looked frantically down the street, but the police cruisers had already followed the IRS agents away. She was completely unprotected.
She spun around, her terrified eyes locking onto me as I stood on the porch.
"Diana, please," Brittany begged, her voice trembling as she rushed toward the wooden stairs. She clutched her pregnant belly tightly, her face a mass of absolute terror. "I know you hate me. I know what Bradley and I did is unforgivable, but you have to help me. Those men are going to kill me. They're going to hurt the baby." I watched her performance without moving an inch.
You have an $18 million trust fund," Brittany cried, tears cutting through her heavy makeup. $50,000 is nothing to you. It's pocket change. Please just wire the money to my account right now so I can pay them off and disappear forever. I swear on my life, I will never bother you or your family again. Bradley promised them the money today, and now he's gone. They aren't leaving without the cash.
I looked down at her tear-stained face, feeling nothing but cold sobriety. My mind flashed back to 3 months ago, on a Tuesday afternoon at the high-end local grocery store. I had been picking up specific ingredients for a dinner Bradley had demanded. Brittany had followed me down the aisle, practically ramming her shopping cart into mine.
She had leaned in close, smelling of cheap vanilla perfume and expensive espresso. She stared directly at the prenatal vitamins that had accidentally spilled out of my open purse after my last failed round of IVF.
"Give it up," she had whispered, loud enough for the cashier and 2 other customers to hear perfectly. "You're just a barren, dried-up wife. Bradley needs a real woman to give him a proper heir. He's tired of playing house with a broken toy. Accept reality and step aside." I remembered the burning humiliation of that moment. The sympathetic look from the teenage cashier. The immense weight of my own grief, used as a weapon against me by a stranger in a checkout line. I remembered rushing back to my car and crying until I couldn't breathe. I looked at the woman who had publicly humiliated me, who had tried to steal my home, and who had mocked my deepest, most painful heartbreak. I didn't even blink. "I am not giving you a single penny, Brittany," I announced, my voice echoing clearly across the yard. "You made your bed, now go deal with the monsters underneath it." Brittany dropped the desperate victim act instantly. The tears vanished and her face contorted into a mask of pure vicious rage. "You selfish old witch," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You're going to let them murder a pregnant woman because of your pathetic jealousy. You're just as bad as Bradley." I smiled. I reached into my tote bag, pulled out my laptop, and placed it smoothly on the porch railing. I flipped open the screen. The light illuminated my face as I tapped a few keys, bringing up a highly detailed, comprehensive background report. "I'm not letting anyone murder you, Brittany," I replied, turning the screen so she could see the high-resolution photographs displayed on it. "Mainly because the men standing in my driveway aren't loan sharks, and they certainly don't belong to any dangerous syndicate." Brittany froze. The colour rapidly drained from her face. In the driveway, the 4 imposing men stopped their aggressive advance, exchanging confused, uneasy glances with each other. I looked directly at the tallest, most intimidating man, standing near the front bumper of the black SUV.
"Good evening, Marcus," I called out pleasantly. "How's business at the custom auto body shop? I see you brought your cousins with you tonight. Did you guys ever fix that transmission issue on 5th Avenue? Marcus visibly jolted, pulling his leather collar up as if trying to hide his face. He looked at Brittany, completely unsure of what to do next. Brittany's mouth hung open. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. I turned back to face my ex-husband's mistress, raising my voice so everyone could hear.
My forensic audit didn't just cover Bradley's offshore accounts, Brittany. When I noticed a recurring pattern of $10,000 cash withdrawals from his personal checking account over the last 6 months. I decided to run a full background check on the recipient. You blackmailed Bradley for quick cash by telling him you owed a massive debt to violent criminals, but you don't have any substantial debt at all. You have a luxury apartment downtown leased under an alias. I tapped the screen again, bringing up a joint bank account statement. And you share a very lucrative high-yield savings account with Marcus, your actual boyfriend of 5 years. Brittany took a massive step back, her hands dropping away from her stomach entirely. "Oh, you aren't running from loan sharks," I continued, my voice carrying an absolute, crushing authority. "You're running a highly professional extortion ring. You target wealthy, arrogant, married men who think they can cheat without consequences. You get pregnant, you create a crisis, you bring in Marcus and his cousins to play the terrifying gangsters, and then you bleed your targets dry. Bradley wasn't your sugar daddy. He was just your latest victim." The federal convoy had barely reached the end of the cul-de-sac when Marcus and his battered black SUV had aggressively cut across the narrow street, completely blocking the government vehicles from leaving. The lead IRS agent had slammed on his brakes, furious at the obstruction. He had dragged Bradley out of the back seat by his collar, pinning him temporarily across the hood of the local police cruiser, while the other agents went to clear the roadblock. Which was exactly why Bradley was currently standing in the damp evening air, handcuffed and humiliated, listening to every single word I said to his mistress. Bradley stared at Brittany, his jaw practically unhinged, his eyes a mixture of absolute disbelief and violent fury. The truth washed over his pale face. There were no loan sharks. There was no mafia debt. The helpless, terrified woman he had bankrupted his mother to protect was nothing but a professional con artist. "Oh, you calculating, parasitic liar!" Bradley screamed, his voice ripping through the quiet neighborhood. He lunged forward, but the federal agent holding his collar yanked him violently back against the police cruiser. "You set me up! You faked those threats! You bled me for every dime I had!" Brittany didn't even bother to defend herself. The moment I revealed Marcus, her victim persona evaporated entirely. She looked at the federal agents standing a few yards away, their hands resting cautiously on their tactical belts. She looked at Marcus, who already had his hands up in a gesture of surrender, backing away toward his illegally parked SUV. Turning on her heel, Brittany abandoned her wrecked pink Fiat without a second thought, sprinting full speed toward Marcus's vehicle. They scrambled inside, slammed the car into reverse, and tore out of the cul-de-sac in a screech of tires, fleeing the scene of their failed extortion attempt. Bradley watched the taillights disappear, his chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths. He had lost his money, his freedom, and now his ultimate male fantasy had been exposed as a cheap scam. Cornered and completely out of options, he turned his venom toward the only target left. He glared up at me, his face twisted into a mask of pure, self-righteous indignation. "And you did this!" Bradley spat, his voice trembling with desperate rage. "You engineered this entire circus just to destroy me. You tore this family apart, Diana. You sent my mother away in handcuffs. You ruined my career. We took vows at an altar. We promised for better or for worse. You swore to stand by me, but instead you spent months stabbing me in the back like a vicious, hysterical sociopath." I stood entirely still on the porch, looking down at the man I had once loved. The sheer audacity of his attempt to guilt-trip me was breathtaking. "How don't you dare weaponize our wedding vows against me, Bradley," I said, my voice cutting through the damp air like a scalpel. "You forfeited the right to talk about loyalty 5 years ago." Bradley scoffed, shaking his head with an exaggerated look of disbelief. "Oh, here we go again. More paranoid delusions." I walked slowly down the wooden porch steps, closing the distance until I was standing just a few feet away from him. The federal agent holding his collar watched me closely, but didn't intervene. "Let's talk about our 3rd anniversary, Bradley," I said, keeping my voice low and dangerous. "You promised to take me to that expensive steakhouse downtown for a romantic dinner." I sat at a corner table in my favorite dress, watching my watch for 2 straight hours while the waiter brought me glasses of water out of pity. "You finally texted me at 10 o'clock, claiming you were trapped at the office handling an emergency corporate merger. Bradley swallowed hard, his eyes darting away from mine. That was a real emergency. No, it was a real hotel room, I corrected him smoothly. You see, Bradley, you were always sloppy with your digital footprint. You used our joint credit card to book a luxury suite at the Four Seasons, which happened to be exactly 4 blocks away from my restaurant. I drove past the hotel on my way home. I saw you walk through the glass lobby doors with your arm wrapped around your 23-year-old assistant's waist. You were laughing. You kissed her right there in the valet lane. The colour drained completely from Bradley's face. The arrogant defiance vanished, replaced by a sickening realization that I had known the truth about him for years.
I didn't scream, I continued, my voice steady and entirely devoid of emotion. I didn't throw your clothes onto the lawn. I went home, opened my laptop, and started accessing your financial records. It was that exact night that I stopped being your loyal wife and started becoming your auditor. For the next 5 years, I smiled at you across the breakfast table while quietly documenting every illegal wire transfer, every embezzled charity dollar, and every hidden asset. I built my case brick by brick while you thought I was just a naive, glorified calculator.
Bradley stared at me, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He was entirely outmatched, systematically dismantled by the woman he had underestimated for a decade, but his desperate, clawing ego refused to accept absolute defeat. He looked over at the federal evidence bags resting on the hood of the police cruiser. His eyes locked onto a thick manila folder peeking out from the top of the pile.
It doesn't matter, Bradley sneered, a manic smile spreading across his face. You can send me to prison, Diana, but you get nothing. I still win. I sold this house today. I signed the contract right there in the living room. The buyer wired the cash directly into a secure, untraceable, decentralized account. The deed is transferred. You are homeless and penniless. You lose. I looked over at Jasmine. She smiled, reached into his sleek leather briefcase, and pulled out a fresh notarized document. She stepped forward, holding the paper up so Bradley could read the prominent federal seal stamped at the top.
Did you honestly believe I would let you sell my property to a random stranger, Bradley? I asked, letting a genuine smile finally surface on my lips. Did you think a highly motivated buyer showing up with an all-cash offer and demanding a same-day closing was just an incredible stroke of good luck? Bradley's manic smile faltered. His eyes darted between the document in Jasmine's hand and my calm expression. What did you do? He whispered. The LLC that purchased this house doesn't exist, I said, watching absolute despair wash over him. The eager buyer sitting in our living room this afternoon was an undercover federal agent. The entire real estate transaction was a coordinated sting operation. The cash wasn't wired to an untraceable account, Bradley. It was wired directly into an IRS escrow account. You just legally transferred the deed of this house back to the federal government, and they are returning it directly to me as part of my whistleblower compensation. Sad. Bradley froze against the hood of the police car. The words hung in the damp night air, slowly penetrating his thick layer of narcissism. The federal agent next to him relaxed his grip slightly, assuming the defeated man had completely lost the will to fight. That was a mistake. Bradley's body began to shake violently. His breathing turned erratic, his chest heaving as the finality of his ruined real estate scam crashed down on him. But the delusion of a lifelong conman dies hard. His eyes snapped wide, a flash of manic desperation igniting in his pupils. He still had his digital safety net. For the past 2 years, he had been siphoning millions into untraceable cryptocurrency wallets, hiding his stolen wealth behind complex blockchains and decentralized servers. He had spent months bragging that no government entity could ever touch his digital gold. With a sudden, violent wrench, Bradley tore his shoulder away from the federal agents. Before the officers could regain their grip on his arms, Bradley thrust his hand inside the inner breast pocket of his tailored jacket. He yanked out a sleek backup smartphone, the one he reserved exclusively for managing his offshore accounts.
Hey, you think you're so smart? Bradley hyperventilated, his thumb tapping the glass screen at a desperate speed. You think you took everything? You forgot about the digital assets? I have $8 million sitting in an encrypted cold storage wallet that even your precious IRS agents can't trace. I'm moving every single cent right now, and then I'm going to watch you rot in this neighborhood while I live like a king on a private beach.
He pressed his thumb firmly against the biometric scanner. The screen cast a pale, ghostly glow across his sweat-drenched face as he opened the encrypted application. The loading icon spun for 2 agonizing seconds. Bradley's manic grin froze. The screen didn't display his massive account balance. Instead, the interface aggressively flashed a vibrant crimson. A bold message in block letters locked down the entire device. Access denied, seized by the FBI and the US Department of the Treasury. "No!" Bradley gasped, his voice cracking into a high-pitched shriek. "No, that's impossible. It's encrypted. It's decentralized. You can't seize a private blockchain wallet."
He tapped the screen frantically, slamming his thumb against the glass, hard enough to nearly shatter it. He mashed the refresh button over and over, his breathing turning into short, hysterical gasps. Yet, the crimson warning banner remained absolute. His digital wealth, his final escape route, his ultimate trump card, had been completely erased by the federal government.
This realization pushed Bradley completely off the emotional ledge. The final thread holding his composure together snapped. He let out a raw, guttural roar, sounding more like a trapped animal than a man. He threw the useless phone directly at the windshield of a police cruiser. In the same motion, he dropped his shoulder and shoved the momentarily distracted federal agent backward into the side panel of an SUV. Gaining a fraction of a second of freedom, Bradley lunged forward. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and locked entirely on me. His hands curled into tight, trembling fists as he charged across the wet grass, intent on taking down his anger on me with his bare hands. I didn't even blink. I didn't need to. Jasmine moved with terrifying, clinical precision. There was no screaming, no panic. As Bradley rushed past her, completely blinded by rage, Jasmine simply stepped into his path. She smoothly hooked her expensive leather boot right behind his right ankle. Simultaneously, she delivered a firm palm strike to his left shoulder, completely turning his own aggressive momentum against him. Bradley didn't even see it coming. His feet left the ground. He airborne for a split second before slamming face first into the muddy lawn with a sickening thud. The impact knocked the wind right out of his lungs, leaving him with a short, pathetic gasp. Mud splattered across his tailored Italian suit and coated half of his face. Jasmine stood casually over him, brushing a microscopic speck of dust off her immaculate blazer. She looked down at her brother-in-law with a mixture of absolute disgust and surgical amusement. "You are always so completely predictable," Jasmine said slowly, her voice dripping with mockery. "Every single time you lose, you throw a violent tantrum. Do you remember that Thanksgiving when Kevin beat you in a racing video game, and you threw the controller right through your father's new flat-screen TV? Do you remember when you missed a simple putt at the country club match and smashed your custom driver against the cart until it snapped? You have the emotional regulation of a spoiled toddler. But this isn't a game you can reset, Bradley. You can't just buy a new TV to fix this." 2 federal agents immediately swarmed the fallen man. They drove their knees into his back, pinning him firmly into the soggy earth. Bradley sputtered and spit out mud as they roughly forced his arms behind his back and clicked heavy steel handcuffs onto his wrists. The loud metallic snap echoed through the quiet neighborhood, finalizing his physical captivity. I walked slowly across the grass, stopping just inches from his head. I looked down at the man who had authorized my misery, betrayed me, and tried to leave me with nothing. His cheek was pressed hard into the dirt. He looked up at me, tears of absolute defeat welling in his eyes. "My money," Bradley whimpered, his voice muffled by the mud. "That's my money. You have no right."
"That was never your money, Bradley," I said, my voice cold and entirely devoid of pity. "And the federal government didn't just seize your cryptocurrency to put it in a vault. They've already reallocated it."
Bradley stopped struggling. He stared up at me, his chest heaving under the weight of the agent's knee. "Reallocated?" he choked out. I smiled. feeling a deep radiating warmth spread through my chest. Jasmine and I didn't just hand over the account numbers. We handed over the complete list of your victims. We traced every single deposit that went into that cold storage wallet. We proved exactly where that $8 million came from. It came from those fraudulent, high-pressure real estate investment seminars you ran all across the state. The ones where you specifically targeted vulnerable, elderly couples. Bradley closed his eyes tightly, shaking his head against the grass. "But you preyed on grandmothers and grandfathers," I continued, raising my voice so the entire street could hear. "You sold them worthless timeshares and non-existent commercial properties. You drained their retirement accounts, stole their pensions, and funneled their life savings into your little digital vault. When the US Treasury receives an airtight forensic audit, they move with incredible efficiency. Every single coin in that wallet has been legally seized, liquidated, and earmarked for full restitution." I bent down, bringing my face close to his mud-covered ear. "By tomorrow morning, hundreds of elderly victims will receive federal checks restoring their stolen retirements," I whispered. "You aren't just going to federal prison, Bradley. You're going to prison completely broke. You have no house. You have no car. You have no wife. You don't even have a digital coin to your name. You are a bankrupt, pathetic fraud, and the whole world finally knows it." Bradley's face went completely slack in the wet grass. With a shuddering breath, the frantic defiance drained out of him, leaving nothing but an empty, trembling shell of a man. He didn't yell. He didn't struggle. As the federal agents roughly hauled him off the ground, he just stared blankly at my shoes. He looked like a deflated balloon. His tailored Italian suit was ruined, and his bottomless arrogance was utterly erased by the absolute mathematical reality of his destruction. Before the agents could lead him toward the waiting federal vehicles, the aggressive screech of heavy tires shattered the quiet evening. A massive white van, bearing a bright red Channel 7 Action News logo on its side, leaped onto the curb at the end of the street. Its towering satellite dish was already fully extended, humming with electrical power.
I glanced over just in time to see Jasmine slide her smartphone back into the pocket of her tailored blazer. She gave me a slow, razor-sharp smile.
"Whistleblowers should always ensure maximum transparency," she whispered, a spark of surgical amusement in her eyes. I figured the 6 o'clock broadcast could use an exclusive breaking story. The side door of the news van slammed open before the vehicle had even come to a complete stop. A highly coordinated crew of reporters, producers, and cameramen carrying heavy equipment poured onto the asphalt like a pack of wolves catching the scent of fresh blood. Blinding camera lights instantly flickered to life, turning the dark, muddy cul-de-sac into a brightly illuminated theatrical stage. They surged up the driveway, completely ignoring the flashing police lights and the imposing federal agents. Microphones were thrust forward like weapons. Leading the charge was a sharp-featured reporter, famous statewide for tearing down corrupt politicians, who marched straight toward the open door of the federal SUV where Barbara was currently being processed. "Barbara Wilson," the reporter shouted, her voice cutting through the chaotic noise of idling engines and police radios. "Channel 7 News, were you aware that a federal warrant has been issued for your arrest regarding the misappropriation of pediatric cancer charity funds? Can you confirm allegations that you systematically stole millions in donations to fund your lavish lifestyle?" Barbara let out a sharp gasp of pure terror. The flashing camera lights glared ruthlessly against her. Her expensive cashmere shawl was slipping off her shoulders, and her perfectly styled hair frizzled uncontrollably in the damp night air. Desperate to protect her panicked face from the high-definition lenses broadcasting live across the state, Barbara awkwardly twisted her handcuffed wrists. She managed to grab her massive, custom Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag from the leather seat of the SUV. She hoisted the incredibly expensive bag high, pressing the exotic leather directly against her cheek to block out the blinding camera lights. "Get those cameras out of my face," Barbara screamed, her voice muffled behind the heavy luxury bag. I have no comment. I am the victim of a vicious, coordinated smear campaign. You are violating my privacy. I demand you turn those cameras off right now. I stepped directly into the blinding spotlight, standing shoulder to shoulder with the lead reporter. I stared straight into the lens of the primary camera, ensuring my voice was loud, clear, and perfectly articulated. The bag she's hiding behind is a fascinating piece of evidence, I announced, pointing a finger directly at the trembling crocodile purse. That is a custom Hermes Birkin bag. It retails for exactly $85,000. Barbara Wilson didn't buy that bag with her own money. She purchased it 3 years ago using a platinum credit card tied directly to the Hope for Tomorrow Pediatric Oncology Foundation. She literally took chemotherapy funding away from vulnerable children so she could carry her lipstick in exotic reptile skin. The transaction records proving this purchase are currently sitting in a federal evidence locker. Satitas Pautsas, the reporter gasped, her eyes widening with professional delight. She instantly swung the microphone back toward Barbara, nearly thrusting it into the crocodile leather. Mrs. Wilson, what do you have to say to your daughter-in-law's allegations? Did you really steal money from sick children to buy luxury accessories? How long have you been defrauding this charity? Barbara lowered the bag just an inch, her eyes wide and blank with sheer suffocating panic. She looked like a deer caught in the high beams of a speeding freight train. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a dry, raspy wheeze escaped her throat. She looked left and right, desperately searching for anyone to save her, but found only the cold, unblinking stare of the camera lenses. The cameramen aggressively panned their blinding lights across the ruined lawn, illuminating Bradley. Coated in thick black mud, his expensive suit ripped at the shoulder, he looked completely broken. Federal agents held his arms firmly, guiding him toward a secondary transport vehicle. "And what about your son?" the reporter continued, her voice carrying a tone of professional triumph as she addressed the live audience. Bradley Wilson, the prominent local real estate developer, is currently being taken into federal custody. We have just received real-time updates from the U.S. Treasury that Mr. Wilson has been running a massive fraudulent investment syndicate, targeting elderly retirees and taking their hard-earned pensions. The reporter turned to face the camera, squaring her shoulders as her tone took on a solemn, authoritative cadence. What you are witnessing here tonight is the complete and total downfall of the Wilson family. Long considered untouchable pillars of high society, they are now being exposed to the entire state as fraudulent criminals who preyed on the most vulnerable members of our community. Their elite status was nothing more than a mirage built on stolen funds and broken lives. Barbara heard every single word. The illusion of her untouchable wealth, her flawless reputation, and her elite social standing evaporated into the damp night air. The brutal reality of her absolute ruin finally registered in her mind. The heavy Birkin bag slipped from her trembling fingers, hitting the asphalt with a dull, heavy thud. Her eyes rolled back, and her knees buckled violently beneath her. This time there was no dramatic gasp, no theatrical swoon, and no waiting arms to catch her. Barbara Wilson dropped like a stone, collapsing onto the muddy driveway into an unconscious heap, while the cameras continued to roll. Barbara's spectacular collapse was met with a chaotic symphony of rapid camera flashes and excited shouts. The news crew offered the fallen matriarch absolutely no assistance. The lead reporter simply gestured to her primary cameraman to zoom in, capturing the image of the elite, untouchable Barbara Wilson lying face down in the mud, right next to her $85,000 luxury bag. It was the perfect, irrefutable visual metaphor for their entire empire. Cheap, dirty, and thoroughly disgraced. The federal agents barely even looked at the unconscious woman. Their focus remained entirely on securing Bradley, forcing him down roughly onto his knees on the damp grass so they could thoroughly search his pockets before loading him into the armored transport. I turned away, tuning out the circus unfolding on the driveway. The flashing strobe lights and shouting reporters faded into a dull, irrelevant white noise. I walked slowly across the ruined, muddy lawn, my eyes scanning the trampled grass until I found exactly what I was looking for. There, lying quietly near the edge of the wooden porch steps, was the thick manila envelope that Bradley had aggressively slammed against my chest just hours earlier. It was the heavily altered divorce settlement he had arrogantly served me. The document he believed would leave me homeless, penniless, and utterly broken. I bent down and picked up the envelope. The bottom corner was damp from the evening dew, but the papers inside were perfectly intact. I pulled out the crisp, legally binding document, flipping straight to the final signature page. Then, I reached into my purse and pulled out my favourite silver fountain pen. Bradley caught the metallic glint of the pen under the harsh news lights. He stopped struggling against the federal agents holding his shoulders. His bloodshot, panicked eyes locked onto the document in my hands, and a new, entirely different kind of terror washed over his mud-stained face. "Wait," Bradley choked out, his voice suddenly frantic, cracking with desperate panic. "Diana, wait. Put the pen away. Don't sign that." I clicked the fountain pen. The sharp mechanical sound cut cleanly through the damp night air. "Do not sign those papers," Bradley screamed violently, twisting against the heavy grip of the federal agents. "You can't sign them, Diana. We need to talk. We can work this out. We can fix it. We're still married. We're still a couple." I paused, looking down at him with a sense of genuine clinical curiosity. The whiplash of his desperate turnaround was breathtaking. 10 minutes ago, he was bragging about leaving me destitute and taunting me with his hidden offshore accounts. Now, he was actively begging me to remain his wife. "Why the sudden change of heart, Bradley?" I asked, stepping closer to where he knelt in the wet grass. "You ambushed me with these papers tonight. You shouted about wanting me out of your life immediately. You wanted me erased." Bradley swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically to the federal agents, then to Jasmine, and finally back to me. His brain was working at 1,000,000 miles an hour, desperately trying to calculate a new equation that kept him afloat. "If you sign that, the divorce is finalized," he stammered, his chest heaving with rapid, panicked breaths. "If we are legally divorced, the federal prosecutors can subpoena you. They can force you onto the witness stand, Diana. They can compel you to testify against me in open federal court. But if we stay married, if you just put the pen down and don't sign those papers, I can invoke spousal privilege. The law is clear. A wife cannot be forced to testify against her husband. We can claim marital immunity. You can protect me, Diana. Please, just put the pen down and walk away." He was crying now. Real, pathetic tears tracked through the thick grime on his cheeks. He stared at me like a drowning man begging for a lifeline. After 5 years of continuous infidelity, systematic financial abuse, and endless psychological manipulation, he genuinely believed he could still weaponize our sacred marriage vows to save himself from a federal prison sentence. A sharp, melodic laugh rang out across the lawn. Jasmine stepped forward, shaking her head in pure, unadulterated disbelief. She looked down at Bradley, her expression a perfect, lethal blend of professional triumph and sheer pity. "You really are the worst, most arrogant fraud in the entire state, Bradley," Jasmine said, her voice easily carrying over the commotion of the reporters in the driveway. "You spent so much time and energy plotting how to completely destroy Diana that you completely forgot to consult a competent attorney." Bradley glared up at her, his jaw trembling with suppressed rage. "What are you talking about? Spousal privilege is an absolute, fundamental legal right. It's a right that applies only to an intact, legally recognized partnership," Jasmine corrected smoothly, taking a deliberate step closer to loom over his kneeling form. "But you didn't just file for a standard, peaceful, no-fault divorce, Bradley. You got incredibly greedy. You wanted to ensure Diana got absolutely nothing in the asset division. So you went to the court and filed fault-based divorce papers." The remaining colour drained completely from Bradley's face, leaving him looking like a mud-covered ghost. "You explicitly cited malicious abandonment and intentional financial fraud as your primary grounds for dissolution," Jasmine continued, her words landing like heavy, physical blows against his fragile ego. "You officially submitted legally binding documents to the state court declaring that your wife was a hostile, adversarial entity actively sabotaging your life. You put that permanently into the public record." "No, Bradley whispered, his eyes widening in absolute horror as the inescapable legal trap he had built for himself snapped shut.
Yes, Jasmine smiled, a cold, brilliant and terrifying expression. By legally declaring the marriage adversarial and officially accusing her of fraud, you completely severed the marital sanctuary. The exact second you filed those vicious papers, you explicitly and permanently waived your right to invoke any form of spousal privilege. The federal prosecutors won't even have to argue with your defense team on this. You handed them the loophole on a silver platter.
She can take the stand and testify against you for days. She can hand over every single piece of evidence she gathered, and your high-priced attorneys won't be able to do a damn thing about it. You ruined yourself, Bradley. Bradley let out a hollow, defeated groan. He slumped forward, his chin resting heavily against his chest. His master plan had been completely dismantled by his own arrogant greed. He had personally handed me the precise weapon that would ensure his next 20 years were spent behind concrete walls. I looked down at the signature line on the divorce papers. Under the harsh, ambient light spilling from the news cameras, the crisp white paper practically glowed. I needed a flat, highly stable surface to properly sign my name and legally conclude this decade-long nightmare. I walked directly over to Bradley. He remained on his knees in the mud, his hands securely cuffed behind his back, his shoulders slumped in absolute pathetic defeat. "Hold still," I commanded. Before he could process the sharp order, I slammed the thick stack of divorce papers firmly onto his broad, mud-soaked back. He flinched violently, letting out a startled gasp as I pressed the heavy documents flat against his ruined, expensive blazer. I leaned over, pressing the tip of the silver fountain pen firmly against the paper. Using the back of my disgraced, handcuffed husband as a makeshift desk, I signed my name with broad, fluid, unapologetic strokes. The dark ink flowed perfectly, finalizing the complete termination of my marriage and the absolute beginning of my total freedom. I lifted the papers from his back, admiring my flawless signature for a brief, incredibly satisfying second before folding the documents neatly in half. I snapped the fountain pen shut and slid it back into my purse. "Thank you for the solid support, Bradley," I said quietly, looking down at his trembling, broken form. "That is truly the most useful thing you've done for me in 5 years." The sudden, sharp slap of the divorce documents against Bradley's mud-covered back seemed to break the final spell, holding the federal agents back. For the past 20 minutes, they had allowed this spectacular Wilson family implosion to play out, largely because every single screamed confession and panicked admission was being recorded on their body cameras, building an insurmountable mountain of evidence. But with the legal documents signed and my personal business concluded, the lead IRS investigator finally signaled his team it was time to wrap up the operation. As the heavy weight of my signature officially sealed his complete ruin, Bradley let out a hollow, defeated groan. He didn't attempt to stand. He didn't attempt to fight. He simply remained on his knees on the damp, ruined grass of his mother's front lawn, staring blankly at the caked mud on his expensive Italian trousers. "All right, show's over," the lead agent announced, his voice carrying clearly over the hum of the idling federal SUVs and the distant chatter of the news crew. "Let's get them loaded up and moved out." 2 burly federal agents stepped forward, grabbing Bradley by his upper arms and roughly hauling him off the ground. They spun him around, pressing him firmly against the side of the nearest black SUV. The sharp, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs echoed across the driveway, finalizing his physical captivity. Bradley offered absolutely no resistance. He was completely and utterly broken. However, as a female officer approached Barbara with a standard pair of cuffs, she wasn't about to go quietly into the night. Barbara's aristocratic delusions flared up one final pathetic time. She twisted her body away from the officer, her eyes flashing with pure indignation. "Don't you dare touch me!" Barbara shrieked, her voice cracking as she tried to pull her expensive cashmere shawl tighter around her shoulders. "You cannot put those filthy metal things on me. I have a severe medical allergy to base metals. My skin is incredibly sensitive. They will scratch my wrists. I demand to walk to the vehicle unrestrained. I'm a prominent figure in this community, not a violent criminal." The female officer, an experienced veteran who had clearly dealt with entitled white-collar criminals before, didn't even blink. She stepped forward with a face devoid of sympathy, firmly grabbing Barbara's right arm. With practiced mechanical efficiency, she twisted it behind the older woman's back.
"Save the tears for the judge, lady," the officer said coldly, pulling Barbara's other arm back and snapping the heavy steel cuffs firmly into place. The metal clicked loudly, securing the wealthy embezzler just like any ordinary street thief. And for the record, federal holding facilities don't offer hypoallergenic jewelry. You'll get used to the smell.
Barbara let out a dramatic, breathless gasp, her face contorting into a mask of pure, martyred agony. She looked desperately toward the news cameras, hoping to garner even a shred of public sympathy. But the reporters merely zoomed in, capturing her pathetic struggle in high-definition glory. The illusion of her untouchable, elite status was officially dead and buried. The officers began guiding the mother and son toward the waiting transport vehicles. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated their muddy, ruined clothing, painting them in the harsh, unforgiving colors of federal justice. Jasmine stood quietly beside me on the porch, her arms crossed, watching the unfolding scene with absolute surgical satisfaction. As the agent pushed Bradley toward the open door of the police cruiser, he suddenly dug his heels firmly into the damp pavement. He twisted his neck, fighting against the agent's grip just enough to look back at me one final time. His face was smeared with dark mud, his slicked hair hanging over wild, panicked eyes. The arrogant, wealthy crypto genius was gone, replaced by a desperate, trapped animal trying to land one final vicious strike before the cage door slammed shut.
"I never loved you," Bradley screamed, his voice cracking with hysterical, venomous malice. He strained against the handcuffs, his chest heaving violently. "Do you hear me? I never loved you. You were nothing but a placeholder. You were a cheap, boring, pathetic little accountant that I kept around to balance the books until I found a real woman. I never wanted you. You mean absolutely nothing to me."
He expected me to cry. He expected me to crumble under the weight of his cruel, parting words. He wanted to take a piece of my dignity with him into that federal cell. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I simply walked slowly down the steps of the wooden porch, closing the distance until I stood just a few feet away from the open door of the police cruiser. The federal agent paused, allowing me this final closing moment. I looked at Bradley, my expression completely serene, completely detached. "I know you never loved me, Bradley," I said, my voice quiet, steady, and incredibly dangerous. "I knew that a very long time ago. But you see, while you were busy convincing yourself that I was just a boring, pathetic little accountant, I was busy auditing every hidden corner of your family history. I looked at far more than just your offshore bank accounts, Bradley. I looked at the original trust documents. I looked at the medical records your mother desperately tried to seal 35 years ago." Barbara, who was currently being bundled into the adjacent SUV, froze instantly. Her head snapped toward me, her eyes widening in absolute paralyzing terror. "No!" Barbara choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "Diana, don't!" Bradley frowned, his manic energy faltering slightly. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his gaze darting between me and his terrified mother. I smiled, feeling the absolute crushing weight of the truth sitting heavily on the tip of my tongue. "You always bragged about your pure aristocratic bloodline, Bradley," I continued, ensuring my voice carried clearly over the idling engines. "You always treated Jasmine and Kevin like second-class citizens, because you believed you were the true golden heir to your father's massive empire. You thought you were the genetically superior, flawless son." I stepped closer, locking my gaze into his eyes, but my forensic audit discovered a very fascinating payment structure in your mother's private accounts, I murmured, low enough for him to hear, but loud enough for the revelation to cut like a scalpel. "Your mother has been paying exactly $50,000 a year, every single year, to a man named Carlos Ramirez. the exact man who 36 years ago worked as the head pool maintenance technician at your local country club. Bradley's jaw dropped. The colour drained completely from his mud-smeared face. He stared at me, his brain desperately trying to reject the mathematical reality of what I was saying. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, tapping it to unlock the screen. I held it up, displaying a digital copy of a highly confidential, legally subpoenaed DNA paternity test. Your father was sterile, Bradley. I delivered the final, crushing blow. He suffered from a severe medical condition that made it biologically impossible for him to ever conceive a child. Kevin was legally and openly adopted. But you are nothing more than the product of a desperate, panicked affair your mother had with the pool boy to secure her position in this wealthy family before your father found out. Bradley stopped breathing. He looked over at his mother, who had collapsed completely against the side of the federal SUV, burying her face in her hands as she sobbed uncontrollably. The absolute truth was written clearly in her total broken surrender. You aren't the golden heir, Bradley, I concluded, taking a step back from the cruiser. You don't have a single drop of elite blood in your veins. You are a biological fraud, a financial fraud, and a complete and total failure. The federal agent pushed Bradley's head down, tucking his limp, unresponsive body into the back seat of the police cruiser. The heavy door shut with a deafening final thud, locking the false golden boy inside his cage. The heavy metal door of the police cruiser vibrated with the force of the slam. Inside the dark, secure cabin, Bradley pressed his mud-streaked face against the reinforced glass. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and completely unblinking. He was trapped, but the arresting officers left the window cracked just an inch, ensuring he could hear every single word spoken across the illuminated lawn. The local news reporters, who had been frantically filming the arrests, suddenly went dead silent. The biological truth I had just dropped about his parentage was so profoundly scandalous that even seasoned journalists needed a few seconds to process the sheer magnitude of this aristocratic collapse. Then, a chaotic frenzy of microphones and camera flashes erupted. I turned away from Bradley's cruiser, walking deliberately toward the second federal SUV holding Barbara. She was slumped against the leather seat, weeping hysterically, her expensive cashmere shawl coated in driveway grime. I stood just outside the open door, making sure the camera microphones perfectly captured my voice over the idling engines. You built your entire identity on being genetically superior to everyone, Barbara, I said, my tone calm, loud, and resonant. You tortured Jasmine because of her race. You tortured Kevin because he was adopted. You told everyone who would listen that your bloodline was pure, elite, and untouchable. But your entire life has been nothing but a cheap, hypocritical illusion. I pulled the thick manila folder from my leather tote bag, holding up a spreadsheet highlighted in bright yellow for the cameras to capture. While tracking the stolen charity funds, I noticed a very specific, recurring anomaly in your personal ledgers. Every single January for the past 35 years, exactly $50,000 was wired from your personal offshore accounts to a small shell company in Florida. My forensic software traced that corporate entity directly to Carlos Ramirez. You paid him over $1.7 million in hush money to keep his mouth shut and keep him away from Bradley. Barbara squeezed her eyes shut, crying so hard she could barely draw breath. The local reporters were practically shouting the scandalous details into their microphones live on air. The self-proclaimed queen of the local country club, the woman who constantly bragged about her prestigious and flawless bloodline, had been running a decades-long affair with the pool maintenance guy and buying him off with stolen funds. Her reputation wasn't just tarnished, it was completely and permanently eradicated. Jasmine stepped up beside me, crossing her arms confidently, her tailored suit looking immaculate under the harsh police lights. To ensure our legal case was completely airtight, Jasmine announced, her crisp voice ringing with professional triumph. I legally subpoenaed Bradley's recent medical records from a boutique fertility clinic. We ran a routine cross-reference with the National DNA Registry. The genetic markers matched Carlos Ramirez perfectly. There is absolutely zero biological connection between Bradley and the man who built the Wilson family empire. He is a total genetic fraud. Bradley slammed his handcuffed hands against the cruiser window, howling in pure, unadulterated agony. His muffled screams leaped through the crack in the glass. His entire identity, his core belief that he was born better than everyone else, had been completely demolished by mathematics and science. He wasn't a wealthy heir. He was the son of a pool cleaner, raised on stolen charity funds. Kevin had been standing near the edge of the driveway, watching the spectacular downfall of the people who had tormented him his entire life. As the truth settled over the chaotic yard, he walked forward slowly. He stopped between the two federal vehicles, looking at his mother with a deep, terrifying emptiness. You treated me like absolute garbage my entire life," Kevin said, his heavy, quiet strength silencing the whispering reporters. "You told me I should be grateful to even have a seat at the dinner table because I was just a charity case. You stole my college fund. You forced me into massive student debt just to protect your perfect biological heir." I looked at Kevin and smiled warmly. "But that is where the law becomes incredibly poetic, Kevin," I said, stepping forward. I pulled the final crisp document from my folder. "When your late father passed away, he left a secondary, highly protected legal trust. It contained the remaining unseized assets from his original real estate empire. Barbara could never touch it because your father suspected her infidelity near the end of his life. He quietly updated the terms of that trust, inserting a very specific, ironclad fidelity clause." Jasmine took the document from my hands, turning to face her husband. "The clause explicitly disinherits any non-biological children born of an extramarital affair," Jasmine explained, handing the paperwork to Kevin. "Your father knew Bradley wasn't his son. He gathered the evidence years ago, but kept quiet to avoid a public scandal. However, the trust specifically protects and includes any children legally and officially adopted by him. He personally filed your adoption papers, Kevin. He ensured you were recognized as his true, lawful son." Kevin stared at the legal document, his eyes scanning the bold text as the massive reality of the situation fell into place. He looked up, his breath catching in shock.
But since Bradley is the product of an illicit affair and is legally barred from inheriting a single dime, I concluded, making sure my voice was loud enough for Bradley to hear through the cruiser window. And since the federal government is currently seizing every single penny stolen by Barbara, the only remaining untouched legal funds from the entire Wilson estate belong to the only recognized legal heir.
I smiled at the man who had worked 2 jobs and endured a decade of emotional abuse from his mother. "Congratulations, Kevin," I said, my voice echoing through the quiet, captivated neighborhood. "You are the sole heir to a $40 million real estate trust. Bradley has absolutely nothing left." The heavy steel doors of the federal transport vehicles slammed shut in an aggressive, sequential cadence. The rhythmic metal thuds marked the absolute permanent end of the Wilson family reign. The lead federal agent gave a sharp wave to signal his team, and the massive convoy of armored SUVs and local police cruisers began backing down the long, circular driveway. Through the tinted glass of the final departing cruiser, I caught sight of Brittany, secured roughly in the back seat. Her pathetic, greedy attempt to blackmail me earlier tonight had earned her a direct ticket to the county jail, riding alongside the very people she had tried to emulate. Her heavily contoured face was a total disaster now, deeply streaked with running mascara and panicked tears. She sobbed uncontrollably, slamming her handcuffed wrists against the reinforced glass. The realization had finally set in that tying her fortunes to Bradley's sinking ship had completely shattered her own future. Bradley and Barbara were in the lead vehicle ahead of her. Their arrogant, aristocratic delusions had been officially traded for a federal holding cell. The sharp wail of the sirens faded gradually into the damp night air, echoing faintly against the surrounding mansions before disappearing entirely. The harsh, chaotic glare of the news camera lights vanished as the Channel 7 van packed up its gear in a frantic rush, its crew eager to race downtown to chase the police convoy for the midnight broadcast. The chaotic driveway finally plunged into a dead, heavy silence. The absolute quiet that followed was almost jarring, leaving nothing but the sound of the evening wind rustling through the ancient oak trees lining the upscale street. I took a long, deep breath, inhaling the crisp night air, and turned to look at the massive, imposing facade of the Wilson estate. The pristine white pillars, the wraparound porch, and the perfectly manicured landscaping had always stood as the ultimate symbols of their untouchable, elite wealth. My gaze travelled down to the expansive front lawn, which had been violently churned into a thick, ugly swamp of mud by the heavy boots of federal agents and the aggressive tyres of the armoured transport vehicles. I stared at the ruined grass, a deep, surprising sense of detachment washing over my shoulders. For 5 agonizing years, this massive property had been my personal prison. I remembered the long, exhausting Saturday mornings I had spent out here in the dirt, on my knees. I had pulled weeds, trimmed the massive rose bushes, and scrubbed the pristine porch pillars until my fingers literally bled. I had desperately tried to maintain the flawless, picture-perfect illusion of our highly successful marriage for the neighbours to see. Meanwhile, Bradley would be upstairs, sleeping off his latest expensive cocaine binge from the night before. I had poured my literal sweat and physical labour into maintaining the structural integrity of his arrogant empire, while he was actively and systematically dismantling my self-worth from the inside out. He treated me like an unpaid property manager, barking orders about the state of the flower beds, while secretly funneling our marital assets into hidden offshore accounts. Looking at the multi-million-dollar mansion now, I felt absolutely nothing. The physical structure held no power over me anymore. The massive crystal chandeliers visible through the high front windows looked cheap and gaudy. The imposing custom oak doors looked hollow and fragile. I felt zero attachment to the expensive brick and mortar that had relentlessly consumed a decade of my life. It was just a house. It was never a home, and I was deeply glad I would never have to step foot inside it again. Kevin walked slowly across the ruined, muddy lawn, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. The heavy, suffocating burden of his mother's endless psychological abuse seemed physically lifted from his shoulders. He stood beside me on the driveway, staring out at the empty street where the police cars had disappeared into the darkness. "Thank you, Dinah," Kevin said, his voice carrying a quiet, resonant strength I had never heard from him before. "You didn't just expose their financial crimes. You gave me my freedom. I spent half my life believing I was a worthless charity case, because that's exactly what Barbara needed me to believe to protect her own dirty secrets. Now that they're in a federal holding cell, I'm going to dismantle every single corrupt piece of the company they built and start over fresh." I smiled, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. "You earned your freedom, Kevin," I replied. "You survived their cruelty. You are the rightful sole heir to the clean funds left in the trust. Now it's your turn to rebuild this legacy the right way, without the poison they injected into it." Jasmine stepped down from the wooden porch, her tailored suit still completely unwrinkled despite the explosive chaos of the evening. She checked her smartphone, tapping the glowing screen in sharp, highly efficient movements. "The federal prosecutors have officially frozen all offshore accounts belonging to both Bradley and Barbara," Jasmine announced, her tone ringing with absolute professional triumph. "The embezzlement charges alone carry a mandatory minimum of 20 years. Combine that with the wire fraud, the theft of pediatric charity funds, and Brittany's recorded blackmail attempt, and not a single one of them will see the outside of a federal prison wall before they are elderly. The assets are secured. The evidence is preserved. We won, Diana. It's completely over." Before I could even respond to Jasmine's incredible legal update, the heavy crunch of tactical boots on gravel drew our attention back to the front porch. A tall, stern-faced federal banking representative stepped out from the shadows of the porch. He wore a heavy dark trench coat with the words U.S. Department of the Treasury emblazoned across the back in bright yellow. A thick steel chain was slung over his right shoulder, and he carried a massive brass padlock in his left hand. He marched straight up the wooden steps, completely ignoring the opulent, monogrammed welcome mat Barbara had custom-ordered from Italy. He didn't look at the expensive landscaping or admire the custom-stained glass windows. He operated with a cold, precise, undeniable governmental efficiency. "Excuse me, ladies," the federal representative said respectfully, pausing at the top of the stairs to nod toward me. "I've been instructed to secure the premises. This property is now officially under federal jurisdiction. All physical and financial assets inside are pending immediate liquidation to provide restitution for the elderly pensioners your husband defrauded. You are legally cleared to vacate the property." I took a deliberate step backward toward the street, extending an open palm in a welcoming gesture toward the grand front doors. "By all means," I said smoothly, a genuine smile breaking across my face. The agent turned, wrapping the heavy steel chain tightly around the ornate brass handles of the double doors, pulling the metal taut with a violent jerk. He snapped the massive brass padlock into place, the loud, echoing clink sounding like a gunshot in the quiet, affluent neighborhood. Finally, he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a bright neon green sticker, and slapped it directly over the center of the beautiful oak wood. Bold black lettering read, "Sized by the United States government." I stared at the heavy padlock and the bright neon warning sign glowing in the darkness. The final physical chain binding me to Bradley Wilson had been officially broken. Turning my back on the massive estate, I walked down the driveway alongside Jasmine and Kevin. The darkest chapter of my life was completely and irreversibly closed. We reached the edge of the sidewalk. The three of us stood shoulder to shoulder under the faint yellow glow of the street lamp. The crisp night air finally felt entirely breathable. I took a long, deep breath, letting the absolute silence of the wealthy neighborhood fill my lungs. There were no more lies to maintain. There were no more performances to stage. We were simply three survivors standing amidst the ruins of a fraudulent empire. Kevin shoved his hands deep into his pockets. He stared down at the asphalt, letting out a long, trembling sigh that sounded like the physical release of decades of psychological pressure. "I can't believe it's actually over," he whispered, shaking his head. "Tomorrow morning, I have to wake up and somehow process the fact that I'm the sole heir to a $40 million trust fund. I don't even know where to begin. I don't have a lawyer. I don't have a financial advisor.
I spent most of my life just trying to survive Barbara's daily psychological warfare.
Jasmine gave him a warm, highly professional smile. "You don't need to figure it all out tonight, Kevin," she reassured him, her tone transitioning seamlessly from lethal litigator to supportive legal counsel. "The federal prosecutors will be busy dismantling Bradley and Barbara's illegal assets for the next several months. Your money is perfectly safe, locked behind the inescapable fidelity clause your father left behind. I have a list of 3 highly respected, incredibly independent trust attorneys who specialize in protecting high-net-worth individuals from predatory relatives. I'll send their contact information to your email right now. Fan." Kevin looked at Jasmine, a deep sense of gratitude shining in his tired eyes. "Thank you, Jasmine. Truly, thank you both for everything you did tonight." He turned to me, wrapping his arms around me in a tight, sudden embrace. For the first time in 10 years, I felt a genuine sense of family warmth from anyone associated with the Wilson name. I hugged him back, resting my chin on his shoulder. "Go home, Kevin," I told him gently. "Get some sleep. The federal investigators will be calling us all in for official depositions by the end of the week. We have a mountain of testimony to provide, and we need to keep our heads clear." Kevin nodded, stepping back and offering us one final grateful smile before turning to walk toward his car parked down the dark street. Jasmine and I were left standing alone on the quiet sidewalk. We watched Kevin's taillights disappear around the corner, leaving us in complete, undisturbed solitude. The locked, imposing mansion loomed behind us, a dark monument to broken arrogance. Jasmine let out a sharp, musical laugh, leaning against the wrought-iron street lamppost as she shook her head. "Can you believe the absolute stunning irony of it all?" Jasmine asked, her dark eyes flashing with brilliant amusement. "For 5 whole years, Barbara treated me like I was completely invisible. She used to call me a diversity hire behind my back. She told her country club friends that Bradley only employed me to fulfill some corporate metric quota. She genuinely believed my law degree was somehow inferior because I didn't come from her fake, aristocratic breeding ground." "Some did," I smiled, turning completely to face the brilliant attorney who had just helped me execute the most perfect legal trap in state history. And Bradley treated me like a glorified calculator, I replied, my voice filled with a hard-earned, quiet confidence. He thought I was just a cheap, boring, pathetic little accountant. He actually believed he was the mastermind of his own success. He never realized I spent 5 years quietly fixing his catastrophic financial mistakes, balancing his fraudulent books just enough to keep the RCs away while I gathered my evidence. It was my invisible, unpaid labor that kept him out of prison for half a decade. Jasmine nodded, her expression shifting into a look of deep, unbreakable solidarity. "We were the outsiders, Diana," she said softly. "We were the women they invited into their perfect, gated community just to do their dirty work. They thought they could use our intelligence, drain our energy, and discard us whenever they pleased. They completely underestimated us. They never realized that the outsiders are the ones who actually hold all the power. We have the intellect. We have the strategy. We just let them dig their own graves while we quietly held the shovels." Standing there in the quiet night, we shared a moment of profound mutual respect. We had walked into the lion's den unprotected, and we were walking out as the ones in control. I turned slightly, unzipping the main compartment of my leather tote bag. The night wasn't completely over yet. I had one final piece of business to handle, and this one had nothing to do with ruin or downfalls. This was entirely about building the future. Jasmine," I began, my tone shifting into a sharp, authoritative business mode. "The federal prosecutors are going to freeze every single asset associated with the Wilson name. The corporate accounts, the offshore shell companies, the investment portfolios. Gone. Bradley's firm is officially dead, which means, technically, you're currently unemployed." Jasmine raised an eyebrow, her lips curving into a slow, amused smile. "I suppose I am," she agreed, "though I think adding completely dismantled a massive criminal enterprise to my resume might attract a few high-paying clients. I'm not particularly worried about my career prospects, Diana." "Of course you shouldn't be," I replied, pulling a thick, pristine, beautifully bound document from my bag, "because I am officially poaching you." Jasmine looked down at the flawless stack of paperwork in my hand, her professional curiosity instantly piqued. "What is that?" "It's an employment contract," I stated clearly, handing it to her. "More accurately, a partnership agreement." Jasmine accepted the document, flipping open the heavy cardstock cover. She scanned the first page, her sharp legal mind instantly processing the terms, the compensation package, and the corporate structure. Her eyes widened slightly as she reached the bold text at the top of the page. 3 years ago, I inherited $18 million from my grandfather, I explained, dropping the final brilliant secret I had kept hidden from Bradley's greedy hands. I locked it away in an impenetrable, ironclad trust. Bradley never had a clue it existed. He thought I was financially dependent on him. He thought he could leave me penniless. But that money has been sitting safely in a protected account, waiting for the day I finally cut the dead weight and started my own life. Jasmine looked up from the contract, staring at me with pure admiration. "You're starting your own financial firm. I am starting a premier wealth management and forensic accounting firm," I corrected her, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. "A firm dedicated specifically to protecting vulnerable individuals from financial predators. I have the capital. I have the vision. I have the unshakable determination. But I need a legal powerhouse to secure the perimeter. I need a partner who knows exactly how to tear down corrupt empires and build unbreakable fortresses." I looked Jasmine straight in the eye, extending my hand under the cool night sky. "I want you to be the chief legal counsel and full equity partner of my new firm, Jasmine," I proposed. "We already proved we are the smartest women in the room. Now it's time to prove we can run the whole city." Jasmine looked at the contract in her hands, then back at the dark, seized mansion looming in the background. She let out a sharp, breathless laugh. Gripping the contract tightly in her left hand, she reached out and took my hand in a firm, powerful grip. Her dark eyes burned with fierce, unstoppable ambition. "I'm in," she said, her voice overflowing with lethal confidence. "Let's go run this city." Exactly 1 month later, The suffocating humidity of that dark, chaotic driveway had been completely replaced by the crisp, biting, high-altitude air of the Colorado mountains. I curled up in the corner of a massive custom leather sectional, tucking my bare feet under a heavy cashmere throw blanket. Across the expansive living room, a roaring fire crackled in a floor-to-ceiling river rock fireplace. Through the massive wall-to-wall glass windows, a gentle evening snow was falling over the private, secluded acreage of my Aspen estate. The towering pine trees were heavy with brilliant white powder, standing like silent sentinels guarding my newfound sanctuary. I took a long, deep breath, inhaling the rich scent of burning cedar and absolute, unconditional freedom. The suffocating weight of the Wilson family was nothing more than a distant, fading memory. Reaching out toward the heavy mahogany coffee table, I picked up a crystal glass filled with an incredibly expensive, perfectly aged Cabernet. I took a slow sip, letting the rich, complex flavors linger on my tongue as I looked down at the glowing screen of my digital tablet.
The headline on the National Financial News portal was bold, sharp, and uncompromising. Former real estate tycoon and socialite mother receive maximum federal sentences in charity fraud scandal.
I swiped smoothly down the digital page, my eyes scanning the cold, mathematical breakdown of their complete destruction. The federal judge had shown absolutely zero leniency at the sentencing hearing. Both Bradley and Barbara Wilson had been officially sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, with no possibility of early parole. The article detailed how prosecutors easily dismantled their expensive, desperate defense team, thanks entirely to the impeccably organized forensic ledgers I had meticulously compiled. Barbara had reportedly collapsed in the courtroom when the judge ordered the total liquidation of her remaining personal assets to pay full restitution to the elderly pensioners she had defrauded. Her beloved country club membership had been permanently revoked. Her elite social status was eradicated, and she was currently sitting in a sterile federal facility wearing standard-issue prison scrubs. Bradley, meanwhile, spent the entire trial aggressively blaming everyone but himself, including his own mother, until the bailiffs clicked the heavy steel handcuffs back onto his wrists. His arrogant belief in his own superiority had finally met the cold, hard reality of the justice system. Brittany had tried desperately to negotiate a plea deal, but her recorded blackmail attempt earned her a solid 5-year sentence of her own. I flipped the tablet face down on the table, feeling a deep, sweeping sense of absolute closure. For 10 years I had lived in a constant state of hyper-vigilance. I had been the exhausted, terrified wife, scrubbing driveway stones until my knees were bruised, managing the fallout of Bradley's arrogant addictions. I had allowed them to convince me that my intelligence was nothing more than a convenient tool to serve their empire. They had systematically mistreated me, undervalued me, and tried to discard me like trash. But sitting here, staring at the warm, roaring fire in my own multi-million-dollar mountain fortress, I realized I hadn't just survived their psychological warfare. I had weaponized it. I had taken every insult, every dismissive comment, and every financial threat, and I had forged them into the exact tools needed to legally dismantle their corrupt dynasty. Placing my wine glass down next to the tablet, I pulled my sleek silver laptop onto my lap. The screen came alive, illuminating the dark, quiet room with a crisp, white glow. I opened the web browser and navigated directly to the private testing link of my brand new company homepage. The design was clean, striking, and intensely professional. Elegant silver lettering at the top read, Vanguard Financial Forensics. Beneath the sharp, modern logo, the company mission statement was laid out in clear, uncompromising language. We are a premier private accounting and legal alliance dedicated exclusively to exposing financial abuse, tracing hidden marital assets, and protecting vulnerable individuals during high-stakes divorces. I had turned the $18 million inheritance from my grandfather into the ultimate instrument of justice. With Jasmine as my chief legal counsel and managing partner, we had built an unstoppable, bulletproof alliance. We weren't just another corporate financial firm. We were a highly specialized rescue task force. We were going after the individuals who thought they could financially trap someone into submission, tracing the hidden offshore accounts, exposing the fraudulent books,
and dismantling the arrogant empires built on intimidation. We were going to give our clients the exact same legal ammunition I used to secure my own freedom.
A soft chime broke the quiet crackle of the fireplace. An encrypted email alert popped up in the corner of my screen. It was an initial consultation, forwarded through Jasmine's secure legal portal. I opened the message, my eyes scanning the desperate, panicked words of a woman whose husband was currently trying to drain her business accounts and force her out of her own home. She had no money, no access to her ledgers, and absolutely no idea how to fight back against his high-priced attorneys. She was terrified, isolated, and completely backed into a corner. I smiled, a powerful, protective warmth spreading through my chest. I knew exactly how to dismantle the man who was doing this to her. Opening a new encrypted client file, I watched the snow continue to fall silently against the glass. I took one final look at the roaring fire, fully embracing the brilliant, liberated empire I had built from the ashes of my own pain. Pressing my fingers to the keyboard, I entered the name of my very first client into the system, ready for the next battle.